we're talking about whether the outcome here is preordained. Obviously, the political piece of this,
how's it going, everybody?
It's remained the same for a long time. The further we get away from the events of January 6th, the more it seems that the immediate political realities are taking over and are dictating what people are willing to do or not do. But I will tell you that the way things feel here, the atmosphere in this building, the looks on the faces of those senators who are paying such close attention to what Congressman Raskin was saying, it's telling a story about a group of people who are living through a moment in history where they are at least being told and shown just how important that role in history is. So I think depending on how we're gonna see what kind of impact this continues to have on these members.
Okay, so I'm live. Here's what I'm doing. I'm trying some new software where I can use picture-in-picture, and I can do some commentary on some different things. So got up a little late this morning, and here the impeachment trial is going, and they're a little over an hour into it. And I thought I would watch some of this mainstream theater news and make some commentary on it. And so far, they are building up this thing that happened on November 6th and calling it like a terrorist attack, and saying that Trump was inciting violence. January 6th, thank you. Thank you. I'm still having my coffee right now. I'm not quite awake. I've been working my ass off for a while now. Been really busy every day. So let's try this again. I can't mute the commentary or pause it. So
until ultimately they're going to have to decide one way or the other whether they believe that former president
did to the Trump defense team, the former president's advisors, and so on. Part one, they're sort of arguing that 13-minute video was cherry-picked, basically, that it didn't show certain excerpts, certain things, like, for example, former President Trump saying that he suggested people peacefully march to the Capitol, for example. That is something that they've been pointing to. The second piece of this is the defense team is trying to argue that the Democrats are putting on a piece of political theater. This is something that came up in their earlier defense.
She just said it. She just repeated what I said before.
And it continues to be a line you've seen and heard the phrase PR stunt, for example, from some of those allies of the former president.
Can you guys hear me when I pause or when I mute that video? I'm just working some bugs out here. So she just said it. Theater. This is the transference and projection that they use. The transference, they pull off some kind of event and then they blame their opposition of the event. It's right out of the handbook. I've lived through it myself. Okay, thanks on the sound check. Appreciate that.
On January 6th. Given, I think, some of the vulnerability that we're seeing from Congressman Raskin and sharing those details, that may be a somewhat risky strategy depending on how it's executed. It's something we'll watch for. What you will see now in, I think, really any minute, Lester, because I think by my clock, that 10-minute break is just about up. It is the first time now that we will see that defense team for the former president, led by two men, David Schoen and Bruce Castor. There are two other attorneys as well that will be involved, less of a high-profile degree, but you will still hear from at least one of them. These are people who were not part of the initial defense team that was put together for former President Trump. These are people who came on really just within the last 10 days or so to join this team.
Morning, everybody.
David Schoen, one of the lead attorneys, had been working.
Decided we could watch the news together. I figured out how to do this picture-in-picture.
Turnover happened because the initial group of lawyers.
This is live on NBC right now. I want to pick one of the mainstream narrative readers.
According to our reporting, because they did not want to make his case that there were election fraud, these false claims of election fraud that the former president has been pushing. That actually led to a split, and that's why you're seeing David Schoen, Bruce Castor, Michael Vanderveen. There is an additional attorney as well, Julianne Bateman, who we've learned about that will be involved. These are people who you will now see over the course of the next 2 hours, and then over the course of the rest of the week, 16 hours, although we don't expect them to take all 16 hours to make that case. when you look at the timeline of how things went down on January 6th, I imagine that one of the pieces that you will hear from both sides is what exactly was Donald Trump's response as he was sitting in the White House. You heard that repeatedly from the House impeachment managers. The defense team, as they have previewed already, will try to make the case that the former president tried to jump into action. That is not backed up by some contemporaneous accounts, even from the president's closest allies. Keep in mind that Senator Lindsey Graham, just within days of the attack happening, within a couple of days, somebody who has been a pretty loyal supporter of the former presidents, although the siege did put.
Okay, that's complete nonsense. If you've been paying attention, Lindsey Graham is a deep state actor. He can care less about Trump. Actually, he's terrified about Trump. He just pretends to be his buddy, and then he's got his knife in his back pocket ready to stab him in the back.
Put some of that into question. Talked about how, as he acknowledged on the record, the former president was slow to grasp the gravity of what was happening, Lester. So watch for that to be a flashpoint here, too.
Hallie, thanks very much. I want to go to NBC News legal analyst Carol Lamb. She's a former U.S. attorney. And Carol, let me bring you back to this question over process versus emotion. Let's put the emotion aside.
Did the mainstream news just say process versus emotion when everything they do is based on an emotional reaction, the problem, reaction, solution paradigm? These people are insane.
For a moment, from a process point of view, how well have impeachment managers made the argument that this is a legal prosecution, that this is constitutional?
Sure. I think they did a very good job. You do want to open with a little bit of emotion, but from a technical point of view, the impeachment managers they've been very clever in the sense that they impeached the president before he left office. And that's very important here because the people who say that you should not be allowed to have a trial or impeach a president after he leaves office, one of their concerns, their stated concerns, is that years later, people could come back and impeach somebody before they ran for higher office. By impeaching President Trump before he left office, they can say, we don't have to look at other scenarios. He was impeached before he left office, and that gives us cover, essentially, in the argument that you could come back much later and impeach a civil officer for things that he did while he was in office. So that I think was a good argument. It's the argument that Michael McConnell, the former 10th Circuit judge, makes, and I think that managers did a good job.
Good. I want to ask you now about that 13-minute videotape. I saw some images that I may or may not have seen before, but I want to talk about some of the sound. They let sound play from within the crowd. We heard the voices of some of those who seem to be leading the way, guiding people into the Capitol. How much does this telegraph the rest of the trial ahead, to the extent that what these people believed, what they think they heard from the president, is critical to this notion of whether he was the one that fired them up?
President Trump sends a tweet criticizing Vice President Pence, insurgents near Senate chamber where senators remain inside. Okay, where was all of this outrage the entire couple 2-3 years before all of this, when the streets of Washington, D.C. were burning, cars were on fire, businesses were on fire all over our country? There were literally people shooting each other, destroying businesses. And now all of a sudden, this thing, which I believe they created also, is this huge domestic terrorism attack.
Sent them into action.
That's a very, very important point you bring up. And I was thinking the exact same thing as I was watching that video, because the general public did not hear that much audio in the news reports.
These guys
following the breach.
All got a check from George Soros.
Even though
all of them, they're not real Trump
may
supporters.
say the president did not intend for this to happen. What those audio.
Insurgents. Notice the words they use. Insurgents reach the door of the House chamber. House members remain inside. They set themselves up to look like the victim while they're staging an attack on the reputation of the president and trying to make it look like he was the one that incited this. This is where I'm thankful that surveillance is at the level that it's at, because all of these people that have made contacts with each other, all of them that have accepted payments, all of them that have metadata in their photos and their videos that they're sending back to news outlets, all of that's tracked. All of it. And they're walking right into it. So, you know, keep going. It's are they that stupid to not understand that this surveillance is being used on them and that everything they're doing is going to come to light? Maybe they're just they have no other option. They've gone too far. They sold their soul a long time ago, and they're like, well, let's ride it out.
We're reaching the Capitol. We're saying we're here because the president told us here. So from an evidentiary point of view, that's extremely important. It's important proof and evidence of what the president was trying to achieve in his statements at that rally before the breach of the Capitol.
All right, Carol, good to talk to you. We'll be talking to you along the way. Former U.S. Attorney and senior FBI official and an NBC News analyst, Chuck Rosenberg, a contributor, Chuck Rosenberg, joins us right now. Chuck, what are your thoughts about how well...
Here's a good comment right here. Karen Rainey says they even let him in one door. Did you guys happen to see the DC police when they were like, the police and the Trump supporters are in a scuffle now. Look, now they're breaking the barrier and they're rushing the Capitol. And the cops are like pulling the guardrails to the side. They're like, go ahead. And then there just happens to be people with cameras filming the one officer that apparently gets rushed by all the people. And he's backing up like, no. There's a cameraman right behind that officer filming. The guy with the bullhorns, which I don't believe is, I don't know what his deal is. There's like 10 professional cameras, a camera crew right around him. I know what a camera crew looks like. I worked with one this weekend with professional cameras. That's a professional camera crew.
The House managers are making their case that this is a legal process.
An illegal process.
Yeah, I agree with Carol, Lester. I think they've done an extraordinarily good job. Now, look, I'm somewhat biased because I completely accept the constitutional argument that proceeding here is proper. And let me just break that into a couple of pieces. Carol mentioned one of them, which I think is important, that the conduct at issue occurred while Trump was president and that he was impeached while president. But also remember this, that Article 1, Section 3 of the Constitution gives the Senate the sole power to try all impeachments. Sole means sole.
Broken Matrix says Bullhorn guy is a psyop. Yeah, I think he really seems like a LARP to me, live action role player. The guy's a former Marine, and I've talked about this before. People want to say all military are on one side or all on the other, and that could be the furthest thing from the truth. Every branch, every professional services group, police, fire, EMS, there are patriots, constitutional observing patriots, and then there are deep state actors, agitators in all of it. And they're fighting it out in the middle of their groups too. So, I mean, this is quite the conundrum that we're living in right now. And the ones that are standing up for us, for our rights, standing up for good, they've got a tough job right now. They're right in the middle of the lion's den. They're right in the middle of the snake pit. And some of them have to try to play along, act like they're playing along with certain things to make it to a certain point in order to get enough, to get a position or power to change things for the better. And it's an uphill battle because a lot of them have been removed. So.
All, and all means all. And so if the president was constitutionally impeached in the House, as the House managers have said, then it is absolutely constitutionally appropriate for the Senate to try that case. And so To me, it seems very linear, very clear. The history, the text, and the structure of the Constitution. Three things that House managers have talked about today all lend support to the argument that the Senate.
I want to grab some coffee before this hearing starts back up.
Trump, even though he's a former president, Lester.
In your view, did that video essentially set up what we're going to see in the days to come?
I think it did. Look, part of the story, of course, is the jurisdictional question, the thing we just talked about. Can they proceed? But once we're over that hurdle, and I expect we'll be over it quite soon, then the rest of the case turns on the evidence that the president did what the House said he did, which was to incite a violent insurrection. And so part of the story, of course, is what the president said before the election.
If you're just joining now, folks, we are watching NBC, factual and truthful news, reporting on the impeachment, the second attempt to impeach President Trump. And I believe this is all theater. A lot of these people they're on the last straw, and they're just struggling to they know they're screwed. So they're just going to ride it out, and we're going to watch and commentate on it.
And just after the election, and on January 6th, and after January 6th, calling into question the propriety, the legality of our American electoral process. But part of the story, of course, is also what the rioters did in response to the president. And so you have to tell all of that. And that 13-minute video, frankly, was very compelling.
All right, Chuck, I'm going to interrupt you right here because we want to go back into the chambers. They are resuming the trial.
And here we go. I guess I could open that screen up more, huh? Let's do that.
Mr. President and members of the United States Senate, thank you for taking the time to hear from me. My name is Bruce Castor. I am the lead prosecutor, lead counsel for the 45th President of the United States. I was an assistant DA for such a long time.
Lead prosecutor, huh?
Prosecutor, but I do understand the difference, Mr. Raskin.
Did he throw that in there intentionally, or was that a Freudian slip?
Before I begin, I want to comment on the outstanding presentation from our opponents and the emotion that certainly welled up in Congressman Raskin about his family being here during that terrible day. And I will not hear any member of the team representing former President Trump say anything but in the strongest possible way denounce the violence of the rioters and those that breached the Capitol, the very citadel of our democracy. Literally the symbol that flashes on television whenever you're trying to explain that we're talking about the United States. Instant symbol. To have it attacked is repugnant in every sense of the word. Loss of life is horrific. I spent many long years prosecuting homicide cases, catching criminals that committed murders. I have quite an extensive experience in dealing with the aftermath of those things. Certainly, as a FOP member and a member of many police organizations myself, we mourn the loss of the Capitol Police officer, who I understand is laying not too far away from here. And you know, many of you in this room, over your careers before they reached this summit here in the Senate, would have had times where you represented your local communities as assistant district attorneys, assistant commonwealth attorneys, assistant state attorneys. And you know this to be true, that when a horrific event occurred in your county or in your jurisdiction, if it was a state jurisdiction, you know that there was a terrible outcry, and the public immediately reacts with a desire that someone pay because something really bad happened. And that is a natural reaction of human beings. It's a natural reaction of human beings because we are generally a social people. We enjoy being around one another, even in DC. We recognize that people all the world over, and especially Americans who share that special bond with one another, love the freedoms that this country gives us.
That we're supposed to have.
We all feel that if somebody is unsafe when they're walking down the street, that the next person that's unsafe could be you, your spouse, one of your children, some other person that you love and know personally.
Yeah, like when they target your entire family.
So you'll never hear anybody
Sounds familiar.
representing former President Trump
Thank you for saying something
say
about
anything
that.
at all other than what happened on January 6th and the storming and breaching of the Capitol should be denounced in the most vigorous terms, nor that those persons responsible should be prosecuted to the fullest extent that our laws allow.
Yeah,
And indeed, I
Antifa.
have followed some of those cases and those prosecutions, and it seems to me that we're doing a pretty good job of identifying and prosecuting those persons who committed those offenses. And I commend the FBI and the District of Columbia Police and the other agencies for their work. It's natural to recoil. It's an immediate thing. It comes over you without your ability to stop it. The desire for retribution. Who caused this awful thing? How do we make them pay?
George Soros,
We
Nancy
recognize in the
Pelosi,
law, and I know many of you are lawyers.
Schumer,
probably lawyers. Some of you, I've been a lawyer
Biden's
35
clone,
years, longer than
Kamala
me.
Harris's clone.
Many
It's all
longer than me,
theater.
probably.
It's all theater.
And we know we have a specific body of law that deals with passion and rage, blinding logic and reason. That's the difference between manslaughter and murder. Manslaughter is the killing of a human being upon sudden and intense provocation. But murder is done with cold blood and reflective thought. We are so understanding of the concept that people's minds can be overpowered with emotion where logic does not immediately kick in, that we have recognized examples that otherwise would be hearsay and said that no, when you're driving down the street and you look over at your wife and you say, hey, you know what? That guy's about to drive through the red light and kill that person. Your wife can testify to what you said, because even though it's technically hearsay, it's an exception because it's the event living through the person. Why? No opportunity for reflective thought. And there's all sorts of examples that we recognize in the law for why people immediately desire retribution, immediately recognize in the law that people can be overcome by events. And you know, senators of the United States, they're not ordinary people. They're extraordinary people, in the technical sense, extraordinary people. When I was growing up in suburban Philadelphia, my parents were big fans of Senator Everett Dirksen from Illinois. And Senator Dirksen recorded a series of lectures that my parents had on a record. And we still know what records are, right? On the thing you put the needle down on and you play it. And
Put the needle on the record.
here's little Bruce, 8, 9, 10 years old, listening to this back in the late 60s. And I would be listening to
Bruce?
that voice. If you ever heard Everett Dirksen's voice, it's the most commanding, gravelly, voice that just oozes belief and sincerity. Must have been a phenomenal United States senator. He doesn't talk about ordinary people as we do in the law. We apply the ordinary person standard. He talks about extraordinary people. He talks about gallant men, was the name of the album. And now, of course, in the sign of the times, gallant men and women. And I would watch television, and I would watch Senator Goldwater or Senator Byrd or Senator Mansfield, Senator Dole.
Goldwater,
and I would be
pretty sure he's from Arizona.
These great men. And everybody's parents say this when they're growing up. You could grow up to be a United States Senator. You could do that. They're just men and women like you are. Well, then Everett Dirksen tells us that
they're in the club, though.
They're gallant.
We need people that aren't in the club to get in there.
That do extraordinary things when their country needs them to do it. United States senators really are different. And I have been around United States senators before. Two of them in this room from Pennsylvania, I like to think, are friendly toward me, or at least friends of mine when we're not politically adverse. And I have been around their predecessors. And one thing I have discovered, whether it be Democrats or Republicans, United States senators are patriots first.
Not all of them.
Patriots first.
Not all of them.
They love their country.
No.
They love their families.
Maybe 5% of them.
States that they represent. There isn't a member in this room who has not used the term, I represent the great state of fill in the blank. Why? Because they're all great? Yeah. But you think yours is greater than others because these are your people. These are the people that sent you here to do their work. They trusted you with the responsibility of representative government. You know, I feel proud to know my senators, Senator Casey up here in the back, Senator Toomey over to the left. You know, it's funny, this is an aside, but it's funny. You ever notice how when you're talking or you hear others talking about you when you're home in your state, they will say, you know, I talked to my senator, or I talked to somebody on the staff of my senator. It's always my senator. Why is it that we say my senator? We say that because the people you represent are proud of their senators. They absolutely feel that connection of pride, because that's not just Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania. That's my senator from Pennsylvania, or Bob Casey from Scranton. That's my senator. And you like that. People like that. The people back home really do. And United States senators have a reputation, and it's deserved. They have a reputation for cool-headedness, being erudite. The men and women that we send from back home to DC to look after our interests. We feel a sense of ownership and a sense of pride in our senators. There's plenty of times I've been around in political gatherings where I hear, there's no way Senator Toomey's going to allow that. I don't mean to pick on you, Pat, but there's no way Senator Casey is going to allow that. Because we feel the pride, and something bad is potentially in the wind. And we expect our United States senators not reacting to popular will and not reacting to popular emotions. We expect them to do what is right, notwithstanding what is immediately and expedient that the media tells us is the topic of the day. So senators are patriots. Senators are family men and women. They're fierce advocates for the great state in which they represent. And somewhere far down that list of attributes, way below patriot and way below love of family and country and way below fierce advocates for their states, far down, at least that's what I thought anyway, and I still think that. Somewhere far down that list.
For the people sticking up for me here, saying that Robert Ward show respect on his channel. Some are thanking Robert Ward. I don't care if these people respect me. Some of them are trolls. Some of them are just misguided people that are here watching the channel. I guess they don't have anything better to do. I really don't care. I do my thing. If somebody wants to show disrespect here, they're just showing who they are. Karma's going to circle back and kick them right in the ass. So, you know, the more they do that, the more they're showing who they are. And I don't care. I've got thick enough skin. They can say whatever they want. Doesn't matter.
Senators have some obligation to be partisans, to represent a group of beliefs that are similar to beliefs shared by other United States senators. I understand that. And in fact, I have no problem with that system. It helps us debate and decide what is best for America. The robust debate of different points of view. And I dare say that Senator Schumer and Senator McConnell represent those things in this body and make sure that everything is talked out and robustly debated in this room before United States senators make a decision of extreme importance to the people they represent. I know you aren't allowed to talk, but I don't see either one of them jumping up and saying I'm wrong about that, because I think that that's what happens. I think United States senators try to listen to each other's views. I think United States senators try to do what is right for the country. And far down is partisanship. In our system,
not the ones that are in China's pocket.
Read the Federalist Papers.
Or whatever other country.
We're very fortunate.
And half of them are on the same team, left to right.
Explanation for
Doesn't
why
matter.
It is the states, the original
There's only a
states,
handful
should adopt the
that give a
Constitution.
shit about
These
us.
were persuasive documents about why the Constitution is a good thing. Because if the individual state legislatures didn't adopt the Constitution, we would not have it. So Mr. Jay and Mr. Madison and Mr. Hamilton, they had an incentive to explain what they were thinking when they wrote it, because they are explaining to other erudite people who represent individual states why it is that they feel that this is the right thing to do. And in fact, as many of you well know, Madison had to promise that there would be a Bill of Rights immediately upon adoption, or we wouldn't have a Constitution. Even then, there was a horse trading going on in the legislative body of the United States. The other day, when I was down here in Washington, I came down earlier in the week to try to figure out how to find my way around. I worked in this building 40 years ago. I got lost then, and I still do. But in studying the Constitution, in all the years I was a prosecutor, where so many things depend on interpretations of phrases in the Constitution, I learned that this body, which one of my worthy colleagues said is the greatest deliberative body in the entire world, and I agree, that particular aspect of our government was intentionally created, if you read the Federalist Papers. The last time A body such as the United States Senate sat at the pinnacle of government.
TikTok's going to ban me if I keep talking about China. Well, I guess they can ban me then.
The responsibility that it has today. It was happening in Athens.
They've already shadow banned me.
And it was happening in Rome. Republicanism, the form of government republicanism, throughout history has always, and without exception, fallen because of fights from within, because of partisanship from within, because of bickering from within. And in each one of those examples that I mentioned, and there are certainly others probably that are smaller countries that lasted for less time that I don't know about off the top of my head, but each one of them, once there was the vacuum created that the greatest deliberative bodies, the Senate of Greece and sitting in Athens, the Senate of Rome, the moment that they devolved into such partisanship, it's not as though they ceased to exist. They ceased to exist as representative democracy, both replaced by totalitarianism.
True.
Paraphrasing the famous quote from Benjamin Franklin,
with help from China.
I feel as though I can do that because he's my founding father too. He who would trade liberty for some temporary security deserves neither liberty nor security. If we restrict liberty to attain security, we will lose both.
Hi, Jinji.
And isn't the way we have enshrined in the Constitution the concepts of liberty that we think are critical, the very concepts of liberty that drove us to separate from Great Britain? And I can't believe these fellas are quoting what happened pre-revolution as.
Okay, that didn't happen. We didn't get separated from Great Britain. The IRS, the Federal Reserve, both corporations, the IRS, the strong arm of the Federal Reserve, the corporations are based out of London, England. The country was turned into a corporation, I believe in 1871, the Virginia Company. And we've been a corporation ever since, operating under maritime law. Now, if you check out, where's that? Do I have that? I don't think I have the link, but if you look up the recent bankruptcy cases, the corporation of the United States has filed bankruptcy and the case was closed on January 25th. Check that out. The debt holders of that corporation were from Saudi Arabia, from China, from other countries. They owned our debt. They were making a lot of money on interest from our debt, from the corporation of the United States. Like I said, that corporation has filed bankruptcy as of, they closed the case on bankruptcy as of January 25th. Go check that out.
As though that's somehow of value to us. We left the British system. If we're really going to use pre-revolutionary history in Great Britain, then the precedent is we have a parliament and we have a king. Is that the precedent that we are headed for?
That's where we've been, and that's what we've been trying to get out of.
Now,
that's
it's
the
not
smoke
an accident
screen.
That the very first liberty, if you grant me that our liberties are enumerated in the Bill of Rights, it's not an accident that the very first liberty in the first article of the Bill of Rights is the First Amendment, which says Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech, etc. Congress shall make no law. The very first one, the most important one, the ability to have free and robust debate, free and robust political speech.
Which is being systematically taken away by big tech.
Something that Mr. Raskin and his team brought up is that it's somehow a suggestion from former President Trump's team that when various public officials were not denouncing the violence that we saw over the summer, that was somehow the former president equating that speech to his own. Not at all. Exactly backwards. I saw a headline, Representative so-and-so seeks to walk back comments about, I forget what it was, something that bothered her. I was devastated when I saw that she thought it was necessary to go on television yesterday or the day before and say she needs to walk back her comments. She should be able to comment as much as she wants. And she should be able to say exactly as she feels. And if she feels that the supporters of then President Trump are not worthy of having their ideas considered, she should be permitted to say that. And anybody who agrees should be permitted to say they agree. That's what we broke away from Great Britain in order to be able to do. To be able to say what we thought in the most robust political debate. My colleague, Mike Vanderveen, is going to give you a recitation on the First Amendment law of the United States. I commend to your attention the analysis that he's going to give you. I don't expect, and I don't believe that the former president expects anybody to walk back any of the language. If that's how they feel about the way things transpired over the last couple of years in this country, they should be allowed to say that. And I will go to court and defend them if anything happens to them as a result. If the government takes action against that state representative or that U.S. representative who wants to walk back her comments, the government takes action against her, I have no problem going into court and defending her right to say those things, even though I don't agree with them. This trial is not about trading liberty for security. It's about suggesting that it is a good idea that we give up those liberties that we have so long fought for. We have sent armies to other parts of the world to convince those governments to implement the freedoms that we enjoy. This trial.
Okay, so what he's talking about right now is completely gone. We don't have liberties and freedoms that we're told we have. We live in a police state. Department of Homeland Security was created to enable that police state. Fusion centers, 78 fusion centers in the United States that collect information from mass data gathering centers, one at Fort Meade, Maryland, one in Salt Lake City, Utah. All that information goes to the fusion centers and gets disseminated out to compartmentalized groups that stalk and harass dissenters, basically. A lot of different groups of people are being stalked and harassed. Everything that I'm saying, my phone can hear right now, my computer, it's picking it all up. The artificial intelligence is sending that to those mass data collection centers. It's going to the fusion centers, and it's coming back through these compartmentalized groups. All of that needs to go away in order for us to have a constitutional republic.
Is about trading liberty for the security from the mob? Honestly, no. It can't be. We can't be thinking about that. We can't possibly be suggesting that we punish people for political speech in this country. And if people go and commit lawless acts as a result of their beliefs and they cross the line, they should be locked up. And in fact, I've seen quite a number of the complaints that were filed against the people who breached the Capitol. Some of them charge conspiracy. Not a single one of I noticed charges conspiracy with the 45th president of the United States. Probably because prosecutors have an ethical requirement that they are not allowed to charge people with criminal offenses without probable cause. You might consider,
unless they use the FISA court, in which you don't get to, you're not notified of what crime you committed, why you've been sent to the FISA court, and then you don't get to stand up for yourself. You don't get to defend yourself. You don't know what you've been accused of, and you don't know why or who you've been sentenced by. So we've got that.
And if we go down the road that my very worthy adversary here, Mr. Raskin, asks you to go down, the floodgates will open. I was going to say it will, instead of floodgates, I was going to say originally it will release the whirlwind, which is a biblical reference.
Ooh, biblical.
But I subsequently learned
it's flooding everywhere right now around the world.
That phrase has already been taken, so I figured I better
floods everywhere.
Change it to floodgates.
Floods everywhere.
But the political pendulum will shift one day. This chamber and the chamber across the way will change one day. And partisan impeachments will become commonplace. You know, until the impeachment of Bill Clinton, no one alive had ever lived through a presidential impeachment. Not unless some of you are 150 years old. Not a single person alive had lived through a presidential impeachment. Now most of us have lived through 3 of them. This is supposed to be the ultimate safety valve, the last thing that happens.
Nixon, Clinton, and Trump.
The most rare treatment. And a session where this body is sitting as a court of impeachment, among the most rare things it does. So the slippery slope principle will have taken hold if we continue to go forward with what is happening today and scheduled to happen later this week. And after we are long done here, and after there has been a shift in the political winds, and after there is a change in the makeup of the United States House of Representatives, and maybe a change in the makeup of the United States Senate, the pressure from those folks back home, especially for members of the House, is going to be tremendous. Because remember, the founders recognized that the argument that I started with, that political pressure is driven by the need for immediate action because something under contemporary community standards really horrific happened, and the people represented by the members of the United States House of Representatives become incensed. And what do you do if a federal issue, if you're back in suburban Philadelphia and something happens that makes the people who live there incensed? You call your congressman, and your congressman, elected every 2 years with their pulse on the people of their district, 750,000 people, they respond. And boy, do they respond. The congressman calls you back, a staffer calls you back, you get all the information that they have on the issue. Sometimes you even get invited to submit a language that would improve whatever the issue is. Well, when the pendulum swings, perhaps the next person that gets impeached and is sent here for you to consider is Eric Holder during Fast and Furious, the Attorney General of the United States.
Sending guns to Mexico with Obama.
The other party considers to be a political danger to them down the road because of their avowed abilities and
working for the firm that targeted General Flynn.
Articulate and having a resume that shows that they're capable. I picked Eric simply because I think he has he's had a tremendous career, and he might be somebody that some Republicans somewhere might be worried about.
Yeah.
So maybe the next person they go after is Eric Holder.
Okay.
And, the Republicans might regain the House in 2 years. History tend to that the White House does well in the midterm elections, and certainly 2020 election, the House gained the House majority narrowed, but there was a gain in Republicans. So the members of the House, they have to worry about these consequences, because if they don't, whatever the problem of the day is.
We're back.
Somebody in that jurisdiction there, somebody is going, if you make me the congressman, I'll react to that. And that means that the sitting member has to worry about it because their terms are short. And it's not just members of the House of Representatives with their short terms. I saw on television the last couple of days, the honorable gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Sass. I saw that he faced backlash back home because of a vote he made some weeks ago. That a political party was complaining about a decision he made as a United States Senator. It's interesting because I don't want to steal the thunder from the other lawyers, but Nebraska, you're going to hear, is quite a judicial thinking place. And just maybe Senator Sass is onto something. You'll hear about what it is that the Nebraska courts have to say about the issue that you all are deciding this week. There seem to be some pretty smart jurists in Nebraska, and I can't believe a United States Senator doesn't know that. A senator like the gentleman from Nebraska, whose Supreme Court history is ever present in his mind, and rightfully so, he faces the whirlwind, even though he knows what the judiciary in his state thinks. People back home will demand their House members continue the cycle as political fortunes rise and fall. The only entity that stands between the bitter infighting that led to the downfall of the Greek Republic and the Roman Republic and the American Republic is the Senate of the United States. Shall the business of the Senate and thus the nation come to a halt, not just for the current weeks while a new president is trying to fill out his administration, but shall the business of the Senate and the nation come to a halt because impeachment becomes...
Yeah, I'm going to read this comment here. Beery Sund, the biggest thieves are the governments that are ruling over you. Yeah, government, mafia, corporations have all merged together, become a corporatocracy, and they are the slave drivers. And a lot of people are waking up and realizing that, and that's what all of this chaos and all of this gaslighting is it's all about.
Comes the rule rather than the rare exception. I know you can see this as a possibility because not a single one of you ever thought you would be doing a second impeachment inside of 13 months. And the pressure will be enormous to respond in kind. To quote Everett Dirksen, the gallant men and women of the Senate will not allow that to happen. and this republic will endure. Because
Yeah, we've been doing pretty good for the last
responsibility
100
of the
years with
United
that.
States Senator, and the top characteristic that you all have in common. And boy, this is a diverse group. But there isn't a single one of you who, A, doesn't consider yourself a patriot of the United States.
Oh, well, they might consider themselves patriot, but
And two, there
just 'cause
isn't
you
a
call
single
yourself
one of you who
something doesn't mean
consider
that
the
that's
other
what you are.
99 to be patriots of the United States. And that is why this attack on the Constitution will not prevail. The document that is before you is flawed. The rule of the Senate concerning impeachment documents, articles of impeachment, Rule 23 says that such documents cannot be divided. You might have seen that we wrote that in the answer. It might have been a little legalistic or legalese for the newspapers to opine on very much, but there is some significance. The
Mockingbird
House
media?
managers, clever fellows that they are, they cast a broad net. They need to get 67 of you to agree they're right. And that's a good strategy. I would use the same strategy, except there is a rule that says you can't use that strategy. You see, Rule 23 says that the article of impeachment is indivisible. And the reason why that's significant is you have to agree that every single aspect of the entire document warrants impeachment, because it's an all or nothing document. You can't cut out parts that you agree with warrant impeachment and parts that don't, because it's not divisible. It flat out says in the Senate rules it's not divisible. Now, previous impeachments, like President Clinton, said the president shall be found guilty of high crimes and misdemeanor for engaging in one or more of the following, and then gives a list. So all I had to do was win one. But they do that here. Has to be all or nothing. And some of these things that you are asked to consider might be close calls in your mind. But one of them is not. The argument about the 14th Amendment is absolutely ridiculous. The House managers tell you that the president should be impeached because he violated the 14th Amendment. And here's what the 14th Amendment says. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or any other state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution, and shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may vote by 2/3 of each house to remove such disability. Now, it doesn't take a constitutional scholar to recognize that that's written for people who fought for the Confederacy or previous military officers who were in the government of the Confederacy. And it doesn't take a constitutional scholar to require that they be convicted first in a court with due process of law.
Due process. That's
So
what we're
never-
supposed to
that
have.
question can never
That's
be
gone.
ripe until those things have happened. Now, if you agree with those arguments, and I know you all get your constitutions out and you'll read it, and if you agree with those arguments, the suggestion that the 14th Amendment applies here is ridiculous. And if you come to that conclusion, then because the managers have not separated out the counts, any counts within the article of impeachment, the whole thing falls. I didn't write that. They are married to that. I wrote it out in individual responses because I didn't know how to respond to the cast the wide net effort. Unfortunately, senators sometime in the past realized that you can't do that because you passed a rule that says, hey, you can't do that. So that's why it's flawed. It's flawed in other ways too, and my colleagues will explain that. I was struck. I thought the House managers who spoke earlier were brilliant speakers. And I made some notes, and they'll hear about what I think about some of the things they said later when I'm closing the case. But I thought they were brilliant speakers, and I loved listening to them. And they're smart fellows. But why are the House managers afraid, and why is the majority of the House of Representatives afraid of the American people? I mean, let's understand why we are really here. We are really here because the majority in the House of Representatives does not want to face Donald Trump as a political rival in the future. That's the real reason we're here. And that's why they have to get over the jurisdictional hurdle, which they can't get over. But that's why they have to get over that in order to get to the part of the Constitution that allows removal. So nobody says it that plainly, but unfortunately I have a way of speaking that way.
I'm going to read this comment by Delania Weir. Sorry if I said that wrong. She said, yes, and in 1871, Act of 1871, because of traitors in Congress, they captured us back, and we've been operating under false constitution ever since. That's the Virginia Company. That's when we became a corporation. We were no longer a constitutional republic, but we were taught in school that we are. And I check out that bankruptcy court document where the corporation of the United States filed for bankruptcy, and the case closed on January 25th.
And the reason that I am having trouble with the argument is the American people just spoke, and they just changed administrations. So in the light most favorable to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle here, their system works. The people are smart enough, in the light most favorable to them, they're smart enough to pick a new administration if they don't like the old one. And they just did. And he's down there, Pennsylvania Avenue now, probably wondering, how come none of my stuff is happening up at the Capitol?
Is he talking about Biden?
Why do the members of the House of Representatives, the majority of the House of Representatives, why are they afraid of the very people that sent them to do this job? And the people they hope will continue to send them back here.
I'll try to find the bankruptcy case and leave it in the comments here.
Those same people who were smart enough to pick them as their congressman aren't smart enough to pick somebody who is a candidate for president of the United States. Why fear that the people will all of a sudden forget how to choose an administration in the next few years? And in fact, this happens all the time when there are changes in administrations from one-term presidents to others. Well, Nixon was sort of a 1.5 term, but Nixon to Ford, Ford to Carter, Carter to Reagan, Bush 41 to Clinton. That happens. The people get.
All right, right here. I just posted it in the comments right there, Michael Barden, and it's www.inforupsy.com. That link right there will take you to the bankruptcy case. You can check that out.
Tired of an administration they don't want, and they
make sure you check out who the debtors are, who the debt holders to the corporation of the United States are.
Know how to change it, and they just did. So why think that they won't know how to do it in 2024 if they want to? Or is that what the fear is? Is the fear that the people in 2024, in fact, will want to change and will want to go back to Donald Trump and not the current occupant of the White House, President Biden. Because all these other times, the people were smart enough to do it, choose who the president should be. And all these other times, they smart enough to choose who their members of Congress were. And by the way, choose you all as well. But they're not smart enough to know how to change the administration, especially since they just did. So it seems pretty evident to me that they do know how.
It's filed in the state of Florida too. Check that out.
It has
Info-rupsy.
worked. 100%
Chapter 11, bankruptcy.
of the time. 100% of the time in the United States, when the people got
Case title.
fed up with and had enough of the occupant of the White House, they changed the occupant of the White House.
Case title, United States Corporation Company, Court, Florida Northern, Chapter 11, Judge Karen Specie, filed 10/14/2020, last filing 1/25/2021, asset no. Northern District of Florida, Tallahassee, assigned to judge. Yeah, it shows all kinds of information here. And here, check this out. Doing business as Corporation Service Company, doing business as CIS Coastal Internation Security, doing business as China Teletech Holding Incorporated, doing business as China Telecom America Corporation, doing business as Fifth Florida Living Options LLC. Why are those people part of the corporation of the United States? Why is the United States a corporation? Are we cargo? The people petitioning are interesting. So anyway, that link to inforupsy.com and the case number 4. Whoa, you right there with it? BK 40375.
Now, I know
What is this guy even talking about?
that one of the strengths of this body is its deliberative action. And I saw Senator Manchin on the TV the other night.
Manchin,
talking
West
about the
Virginia.
filibuster. And the main point was that Senator Manchin was explaining to those of us who don't operate here all the time.
A lot of people in West
that this
Virginia are
body
not fans of
has an
Manchin.
obligation to try to reach consensus across the aisle to legitimize the decisions it makes. Obviously, he's capable of making his own pronouncements on it, but that's what it came across on the television. And I think that that is a good way of saying why the Senate of the United States is different than other places. You know, the Constitution is a document designed to protect the rights of the minority, not the rights of the majority. Congress shall make no law abridging all of these things. That's because those were the things that were of concern at the time. It's easy to be in favor of liberty and equality and free speech when it's popular.
Word salad, yes.
I think that
Delania Weir, word salad.
my colleague, Mr. Sean, an opportunity to explain to all of us the legal analysis on jurisdiction. I'll be quite frank with you. We changed what we were going to do on account that we thought that the House manager's presentation was well done. And I wanted you to know that we have responses to those things. I thought that what the first part of the case was, which was the equivalent of a motion to dismiss, was going to be about jurisdiction alone. And one of the fellows who spoke for the House managers, who was a former criminal defense attorney, seemed to suggest that there's something nefarious, that we were discussing jurisdiction and trying to get the case dismissed. But this is where it happens in the case, because jurisdiction is the first thing that has to be found. We have counter arguments to everything that they raised, and you will hear them later on in the case from Mr. Van der Veen and from myself. But on the issue of jurisdiction, the scholarly issue of jurisdiction, I'll leave you with this before I invite David to come up and give you the erudite explanation. Some of this was shown on the screen, but Article 1, Section 3 says, judgments in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold any office of honor, trust, profit under the United States.
Yeah, I agree with Delania on that last comment.
Nevertheless be
It's all
liable
theater.
and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. So this idea of
Okay, I feel, I'm going to read this comment. I feel the same way. This is all theater to give the public time to research for themselves and realize everything they know is a lie. It has to be done slowly, so not to shatter hearts and minds. Big stuff, big biblical. 100%. There's a lot of people that are still trapped in the matrix, that are still stuck on the mainstream narrative. They think that everybody on this mainstream media is here to help them. They think everybody in the government's here to help them. They don't get the internal battles. We're doing our best to wake those people up, but I think, yeah, this is all theater.
January amnesty is nonsense. If my colleagues on this side of the chamber actually think that President Trump committed a criminal offense, and let's understand, a high crime is a felony and a misdemeanor is a misdemeanor. The words haven't changed that much over the time. After he's out of office, you go and arrest him. So there is no opportunity where the president of the United States can run rampant in January, the end of his term, and just go away scot-free. The Department of Justice does know what to do with such people. And so far, I haven't seen any activity in that direction. And not only that, the people who stormed this building and breached it were not accused of conspiring with the president. But the section I read, judgment, in other words, the bad thing that can happen, the judgment, in cases of impeachment, i.e. what we are doing, shall not extend further than removal from office. What is so hard about that? Which of those words are unclear? Shall not extend further than removal from office. President Trump no longer is in office. The object of the Constitution has been achieved. He was removed by the voters. Mr. Schoen, are you ready? Now that I've taken all of his time, thank you, Mr. President.
Look at all these people defending our free constitutional republic, wearing masks like slaves for a fake pandemic used for social engineering. The hypocrisy,
President, leaders.
What are your opinions on why they're trying to
stand before
impeach
you
President Trump
on what I have
if he's
always
not the
thought
president anymore?
as the hallowed ground of democracy. In this room, American lives have been changed so dramatically in just my lifetime through so many of your legislative initiatives, from the Civil Rights Act when I was a child, through most recently the First Step Act, laws that have provided major opportunities for American.
Exactly. If that attorney is on Trump's side, why does he keep saying the voters removed Trump? That almost sounds about how my attorney defended me. It's like the attorney in Idiocracy. What's the guy's name? Frito. If you haven't seen the movie Idiocracy, watch that. That guy did not seem like he was on Trump's side. I don't know. Didn't feel like it to me. Why is he saying that the voters removed Trump? They're still investigating that. Here in Maricopa County, they're still going through it right now. All of the swing states, they're still being investigated. They're still going to court. I feel like I'm doing commentary on a Broadway play here, a really bad one.
To move forward and upward and more fully enjoy all of the attributes of what has been the greatest nation on earth.
MAGA 1776 said they're gaslighting people. Yeah,
through my clients
on a
every
mass
day
level.
For the past 36 years.
Mass-lighting.
These laws have enabled me to fight for their enjoyment of a fair stake in our American project. I stand before a group of 100 United States senators who have chosen to serve your country from all corners of this great nation, giving up all sorts of professions, time with family, and perhaps other more lucrative opportunities to serve your country. Mr. President, you are a man who so honorably served this nation in the Senate and in public service before your tenure here.
Who's he talking to?
It is an honor to appear in this historic hall of democracy, yet today, that honor is tempered by an overriding feeling of grave concern. Grave concern for the danger to the institution of the presidency that I believe even convening these proceedings indicates. The joy I believed I would feel if I ever had the great privilege of appearing before this body is replaced by sadness and pain. My overriding emotion is frankly wanting to cry for what I believe these proceedings will do to our great, so long enduring, sacred Constitution and to the American people on both sides of the great divide that now characterizes our nation. Esteemed members of the Senate, going forward with this impeachment trial of a former president of the United States is unconstitutional for reasons we have set out in our brief, some of which we will focus on here. And as a matter of policy, it is wrong, as wrong can be for all of us as a nation.
And if he isn't the president, what are they so afraid of?
By those who favor having these proceedings that we have to do it for accountability. But anyone truly interested in real accountability for what happened at the Capitol on January 6th, would of course insist on waiting for a full investigation.
Giant street theater skit?
Indeed, one is underway in earnest already, intent on getting to the bottom of what happened. Anyone interested in ensuring that it's truly the one or ones responsible from whom accountability is sought would more than willingly wait for the actual evidence, especially with new evidence coming in every day about pre-planning, about those who were involved, and about their agenda bearing no relationship to the claims made here. They say you need this trial before the nation can heal, that the nation cannot heal without it. I say our nation cannot possibly heal with it. With this trial, you will open up new and bigger wounds across the nation, for a great many Americans see this process for exactly what it is: a chance by a group of partisan politicians seeking to eliminate Donald Trump from the American political scene and seeking to disenfranchise 74 million plus American voters and those who dare to share their political beliefs and vision of America.
They hated the results of the 2016 election and want to use this impeachment.
That word disenfranchised is a big deal. So the N-word, that's what that word means. It means a disenfranchised person. That's where that came from. And that's why they started calling black people that. Do a little research on that word, disenfranchised. And well, I don't know if you want to search the other word, which I will not say, but seems to be a big deal right now. That's where that word came from.
Impeachment process to further their political agenda. These elitists have mocked them for 4 years. They've called their fellow Americans who believe in their country and their Constitution deplorables. And the latest talk is that they need to deprogram those who supported Donald Trump and the grand old party. But at the end of the day, this is not just about Donald Trump or any individual. This is about our Constitution and abusing the impeachment power for political gain.
Why did he just hold his head like that when he drank his water?
Excuse me.
What?
They tell us that we have to have this impeachment trial, such as it is, to bring about unity. But they don't want unity, and they know this so-called trial will tear the country in half, leaving tens of millions of Americans feeling left out of the nation's agenda, as dictated by one political party that now holds the power in the White House and in our national legislature. But they're proud Americans who never quit getting back up when they're down, and they don't take dictates from another party based on partisan force feeding. This trial will tear this country apart, perhaps like we have only seen once before in our history. And to help the nation heal, we now learn that the House managers, in their wisdom,
David Schoen,
have hired a movie company and a large law firm to create, manufacture, and splice for you a package designed by experts to chill and horrify you and our fellow Americans.
Okay, that's true.
They want to put you through a 16-hour presentation over 2 days, focusing on this as if it were some sort of blood
Mask is gonna
sport.
come off.
And to what end? For healing? For unity? For accountability? Not for any of those. For surely there are much better ways to achieve each. It is again for pure, raw, misguided partisanship that makes them believe playing to our worst instincts somehow is good. They don't need to show you movies to show you that the riot happened here. We will stipulate that it happened, and you know all about it. This is a process fueled irresponsibly by base hatred by these House managers and those who gave them their charge, and they are willing to sacrifice our national character to advance their hatred and their fear that one day they might not be the party in power. They have a very different view of democracy and freedom from Justice Jackson, who once wrote, "But freedom to differ is not limited to things that do not matter much. That would be a mere shadow of freedom. The test of its substance is the right to differ as to things that touch at the heart of the existing order." They have a very different view of democracy and freedom. This is nothing less than the political weaponization of the impeachment process. Pure, raw sport.
Just like everything else is
misguided idea of
weaponized.
party over country, when in fact both will surely suffer. I can promise you that if these proceedings go forward, everyone will look bad. You will see and hear many members of our Congress saying and doing things they must surely regret. But perhaps far worse than a moment of personal shame in a world in which history passes from our memories in a moment, our great country, a model for all the world, will be far more divided, and our standing around the world will be badly broken. Our arch enemies who pray each and every day for our downfall will watch with glee, glowing in the moment as they see you at your worst and our country in internal divide. Let's be perfectly clear. If you vote to proceed with this impeachment trial, future senators will recognize that you bought into a radical constitutional theory that departs clearly from the language of the Constitution itself and holds, and this is in their brief, that any civil officer who ever dares to want to serve his or her country must know that they will be subject to impeachment long after their service in office has ended, subject only to the political and cultural landscape of the day that is in operation at any future time. This is exactly the position taken by the House managers at page 65 of their brief. Unprecedented, radical position. They unabashedly say so. Imagine the potential consequences for civil officers you know and who you believed served so honorably, but who in the view of a future Congress might one day be deemed to be impeachment worthy. Imagine it now, because your imagination is the only limitation. The House managers tell you a correct reading of the impeachment power under the Constitution is that it has no temporal limit and can reach back in time without limitation to target anyone who dared to serve our nation as a civil officer.
Whoa.
Now add that to their demand that you members
To target anyone that dared to serve our nation as a what? What did he say?
put your imprimatur on the snap impeachment they returned in this case, and can do again in the future if you endorse it by going forward with this impeachment trial. This is an untenable combination that literally puts the institution of the presidency directly at risk, nothing less. And it does much more. Under their unsupportable constitutional theory and tortured reading of the text, every civil officer who has served is at risk of impeachment if any given group elected to the House decides that what was thought to be important service to the country when they served now deserves to be canceled.
Ooh.
They've made clear in public statements that what they really want to accomplish here in the name of the Constitution is to bar Donald Trump from ever running for political office again. But this is an affront to the Constitution, no matter who they target today. It means nothing less than the denial of the right to vote and the independent right for a candidate to run for elective political office, guaranteed by the First and 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution, under the guise of impeachment as a tool to disenfranchise. Perhaps my friend put the situation simply and sharply into focus last week on his radio show. My friend is a distinguished lawyer who served as an ambassador to former President Obama and has friends among you.
Whoa.
He described himself to his listeners as a dyed-in-the-wool, lifelong Democrat. But he said, the idea of 100 people in these circumstances deciding that tens of millions of American voters cannot cast their vote for their candidate for president ever again is unthinkable, and it truly should be. I will discuss today several reasons this matter should not and must not proceed, why the Senate lacks jurisdiction to conduct this trial of a former president, a president no longer in office and now a private citizen. Any single reason in our trial memorandum or discussed today suffices. But I want to start with a discussion of the fundamental due process lacking from the start, and that would last through the end if this goes forward, because it is this irretrievably flawed process and its product, a dangerous snap impeachment, that brings us here and that threatens to send a message into the future that we will all regret forever.
Whoa. Pause, damn it. My girlfriend Andrea is on the live stream right now, and I agree with she says, what's up with touching his head every time he takes a drink? What is that? Is that like some some signaling, some kind of, who does that? Why is he doing that? Is that some kind of distraction? Is that, he doesn't have a toupee on. He's got the George Jefferson haircut, like I'd have if I grew my hair out, but what is going on with that? He's saying some good things here. He's talking about people being targeted. He's talking about due process, which we don't have anymore in the United States. But I don't know. This is interesting. This is he's propping up somebody that was in the Obama administration.
And that stain this body, which up to now our founding fathers believed was uniquely suited for the most difficult task of conducting an impeachment trial, as Mr. Hamilton wrote in Federalist 65. These aren't just niceties. I make no apology for demanding in your name, in the name of the Constitution, that the rights to due process guaranteed under the Constitution are adhered to in a process as serious as this.
Then talk about
in our
the
national
FISC.
lives. The denial of due process in this case, of course, starts with the House of Representatives. In this unprecedented snap impeachment process, the House of Representatives denied every attribute of fundamental constitutional due process that Americans correctly have come to believe is part of what makes this country so great. How and why did that happen? It is a function of the insatiable lust for impeachment in the House for the past 4 years. Consider this.
I want to say this for Donald Trump, who I may well be voting to impeach.
Donald Trump has already done a number of things which legitimately raise the question of impeachment.
I don't respect this president.
Like what?
And I will fight every day until he is impeached.
That is grounds to start impeachment proceedings. Those are grounds to start impeachment. Those are grounds to start impeachment proceedings. Yes, I think that's grounds to start impeachment proceedings.
I rise today, Mr. Speaker, to call for the impeachment of the President of the United States of America. I continue to say, impeach him! Impeach 45! Impeach 45!
So we're calling upon the House to begin impeachment hearings immediately. On the impeachment, Donald Trump, would you vote yes or no?
I would vote yes. I would vote to impeach.
Because we're gonna go in there, we're gonna impeach the mother.
But the fact is, I introduced articles of impeachment in July of 2017.
If we don't impeach this president, he will get reelected.
My oath requires me to be for impeachment, have an impeachment hearing, and he's the scarlet eye on his chest.
Representatives should begin impeachment proceedings against this president.
It is time to bring impeachment charges against him. Bring impeachment charges.
My personal view is that he richly deserves impeachment.
His personal view was that all of the riots that were going on were a hoax, which some of it was theater, but there were actual people hurt, businesses destroyed.
At an impeachment rally, and we are ready to impeach them.
For what? For what?
The relevant timeline in the House reveals the rush to judgment. On the day following the January 6th riot, the House leadership cynically sensed a political opportunity to score points against the outgoing then President Trump. And the Speaker demanded that Vice President Pence invoke the 25th Amendment, threatening immediate impeachment for the president if Mr. Pence did not comply with this extraordinary and extraordinarily wrong demand. 4 days later, on January 11th, 2021, the instant article of impeachment was introduced in the House. Speaker Pelosi then gave the Vice President another ultimatum, threatening to begin impeachment proceedings within 24 hours if he did not comply. Vice President Pence rejected Speaker Pelosi's demand, favoring instead adherence to the Constitution and the best interests of the nation over a politically motivated threat. On January 12th, Speaker Pelosi announced who the 9 impeachment managers would be. And on January 13th, 2021, just days after holding a press conference to announce the launching of an inquiry, the House adopted the article of impeachment, completing the fastest impeachment inquiry in history and according President Trump no due process at all over strong opposition based in large part on the complete lack of due process. To say there was a rush to judgment by the House would be a grave understatement. It is not as if the House members who voted to impeach were not mightily warned about the dangers to the institution of the presidency and about our system and to our system of due process. They were warned in the strongest of terms from within their own ranks, adamantly, clearly, and in no uncertain terms, not to take this dangerous snap impeachment course. Those warnings were framed in the context of the constitutional due process that was denied here. Consider the warnings given by one member during the House proceedings, pleading with the other members to accord this decision the due process the Constitution demands. This is Representative Cole of Oklahoma. With only 1 week to go in his term, the majority is asking us to consider a resolution impeaching President Trump. And they do so knowing full well that even if the House passes the resolution, the Senate will not be able to begin considering these charges until after President Trump's term ends. I can think of no action the House can take that is more likely to further divide the American people than the action we are contemplating today. Emotions are clearly running high, and political divisions have never been more apparent in my lifetime, Representative Cole said. Mr. Cole's words on the floor, emphasizing the care that must be taken with respect to the consideration of an article of impeachment, echoed the concerns by our founding fathers on this subject. Listen to this from Mr. Hamilton in Federalist number 65. Quote, "A well-constituted court for the trial of impeachments is an object not more to be desired than difficult to be obtained in a government wholly elective. The prosecution of them, for this reason, will seldom fail to agitate
people
the
out in front of my
passions
house
the whole
yelling and
community,
screaming right now.
and to divide into parties more or less friendly or inimical to the accused. In many cases, it will connect itself with pre-existing factions and will enlist all their animosities, partialities, influence, and interest on one side or on the other. In such cases, there will always be the greatest danger that the decision will be regulated more by the comparative strength of parties than by the real demonstrations of innocence or guilt." Prescient thinking by Mr. Hamilton, as we see often. And what I say to you is a proof of the need for due process based on the critically serious nature of the singular role the impeachment process has in our government.
Okay, some of the stuff this guy's saying I like, but let's think about this. What does all of this talk really do? If the senators that are complicit in this whole thing have already made up their mind what they're going to do before all of these hearings, what does that make all of these speeches? Theater, just speaking so people can hear him talk? What does this do? Is what he's saying somehow going to change their mind if they're complicit in treason? They're going to be like, well, he makes a good point. We're all guilty, and we'll either be hung for treason or go to prison for the rest of our life. But, he makes a good point, so I'm going to go ahead and cast my vote differently.
Mr. Hamilton characterized the consideration of an impeachment in these terms: the delicacy and magnitude of a trust which so deeply concerns the political reputation and existence of every man engaged in the administration of public affairs speak for themselves. This too in Federalist 65. Now back to the House and the warnings against this rush judgment in this case. Mr. Cole of Oklahoma again. In the name of healing, a path forward, he said, our people so desperately need, he warned that, quote, "The House is moving forward erratically with a truncated process that does not comport with a modern practice and that will give members no time to contemplate the serious nature of action before us." Mr. Cole emphasized to his colleagues that such care must be taken with the consideration of an article of impeachment, quote, "in order to ensure that the American people have confidence in the procedures the House is following, and because the presidency itself demands due process in the impeachment proceedings." Congressman Cole continued, "Unfortunately," this is a quote, "the majority has chosen to race to the floor with a new article of impeachment, foregoing any investigation, any committee process, or any chance for members to fully contemplate this course of action before proceeding." Mr. Cole complained that the majority is failing to provide the House with an opportunity to review all the facts which are still coming to light, to discuss all the evidence, to listen to scholars, to examine the witnesses, and to consider precedents. He noted further, this is not the type of robust process we have followed for every modern impeachment, and the failure to do so does a great disservice to this institution and to this country, Mr. Cole said. Mr. Cole complained right on the House floor that rather than following the appropriate processes, he said the House has used in every modern impeachment, the majority is rushing to the floor, tripping all over themselves in their rush to impeach the president a second time. And in Mr. Cole's words, it was doing so to, quote, "settle scores." And he warned that this snap impeachment approach would cause great division as the country looks ahead to the start of a new administration. He said to them, in a matter as grave and consequential as impeachment, Shouldn't we follow the same process we've used in every modern impeachment rather than rushing to the floor? And he implored them, on behalf of generations of Americans to come, we need to think more clearly about the consequences of our action today. And Mr. Cole then reached across the aisle and credited a member of this body, Senator Manchin, with having voiced similar sentiments about how ill-advised this rushed process was, suggesting that the underlying events were a matter for the judicial system to investigate, not one for a rushed political process. Finally, Mr. Cole admonished his fellow House members, telling them, we need to recognize that we are following a flawed process.
You think?
The alarm Mr. Cole sounded went unheeded. Now let us consider the process in the House that actually was due. The House managers assert in a memorandum that the House serves as a grand jury and prosecutor under the Constitution. They told you that again today. If this is accurate, then they highlight the complete failure to adhere to due process. One should not diminish the significance of impeachment's legal aspects, particularly as they relate to the formalities of the criminal justice process. It is a hybrid of the political and legal, a political process moderated by legal formalities. This is a quote, Richard Broughton. The Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution provides, in relevant part, that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law.
And we all know that, that happens every day in the United States. All of us are allowed due process, and all of us are given our right to travel freely and not be impeded. And okay, this guy is defending Trump. I don't know if I believe 100% that he isn't just another one of the actors that are playing along with this, but they keep talking about our constitutional rights. Why is nobody talking about, well, here's why, because so many of them are part of the club that we're not in, and they benefit from it. We're basically living in communist Stasi Germany currently. CCP China, the surveillance, tracking, stalking and harassing, destruction of small businesses, destruction of journalists, true journalists, not narrative readers like this channel that we're watching here. If you're not a bad actor, you get targeted. Nobody seems to want to talk about that. Few people, Trump does. Trump calls fake news all the time. That's what he's talking about. Smith-Mundt, Truman Show, fake news. Watched it happen. We all watch it happen.
In Matthews versus Eldridge, that at its core, due process is about what we all want, what we all have the right to demand, fundamental fairness. One scholar, Brian Owsley, has written that the impeachment process should and does include some of the basic safeguards for the accused that are observed in a criminal process, such as fairness, due process, presumption of innocence, and proportionality, basic American values. And of course, we know that the Supreme Court has recognized that due process protection attend congressional investigations. While Congress is empowered to make its own rules of proceeding, it may not make rules ignore constitutional restrictions.
Delania Weir has a lot of good comments here, and I agree with that. This is just something in general. Our rights are taken away from us and then sold back to us in the form of a permit for so many different things: driving, carrying a firearm, all kinds of different stuff.
Restraints or violate fundamental rights. Excuse me. While the case law is limited in terms of spelling out what due process looks like in impeachment hearings, and of course in the Nixon case, Walter, not Richard, we know that there's a great deal of leeway afforded Congress with respect to its impeachment rules. It is clear that the fundamental principles that underlie our understanding of what due process must always look like apply. In Hastings versus United States, DC court case, reversed, vacated on different grounds, they addressed the matter, clearly concluding that the due process clause applies to impeachment proceedings and that it imposes an independent constitutional constraint on how the Senate exercises its sole power to try all impeachments under Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6. Court wrote in Hastings, impeachment is an extraordinary remedy. As an essential element of our constitutional system of checks and balances, impeachment must be invoked and carried out with solemn respect and scrupulous attention to fairness. Fairness in due process must be the watchword whenever a branch of the United States government conducts a trial, whether it be in a criminal case, a civil case, or a case of impeachment. A 1974 Department of Justice memo suggested the same view, opining that, quote, whether or not capable of judicial enforcement, due process standards would seem to be relevant to the manner of conducting an impeachment proceeding. More specifically, as the Hastings court described it, one of the key principles that lies at the heart of our constitutional democracy. Again, fairness. The Supreme Court's precedents establish the general rule that individuals must receive notice and an opportunity to be heard before the government deprives them of a constitutionally protected interest. It is also true that in any proceeding that may lead to deprivation of a protected interest, it requires fair procedures commensurate with the interests at stake. Impeachment proceedings plainly involve deprivations of property and liberty interests protected by the due process clause.
Deprivation of rights and color law.
Surely seeks to strip Donald Trump of his most highly cherished constitutional rights, including the right to be eligible to hold public office again, should he so choose. Due process must apply, and at a minimum, due process in the impeachment process must include that the evidence must be disclosed to the accused, and the accused must be permitted an opportunity to test and confront the evidence, particularly through the rights to confront and cross-examine witnesses, which have long been recognized as essential to due process. In almost every setting where important decisions turn on questions of fact, due process requires an opportunity to confront and cross-examine. It is unfathomable that the framers, steeped in the history of Anglo-American jurisprudence, would create a system that would allow the chief executive and commander-in-chief of the armed forces to be impeached based on a process that developed evidence without providing any of the elementary procedures that the common law developed over centuries for ensuring the proper testing of evidence in an adversarial process. We would never countenance such a system in this country. Current members of the House and Senate leadership are themselves on record repeatedly confirming these procedural due process requirements. Indeed, Congressman Nadler is on record asserting that in the context of a House impeachment investigation, due process includes, quote, the right to be informed of the charges against you, to call your own witnesses, and to have the assistance of counsel.
Yes.
Then President Trump was not given any semblance of the due process Congressman Nadler clearly believes he deserves, based on the congressman's description of due process that must be afforded to an accused in an impeachment proceeding, as reflected in a statement he made relating to another impeachment in 1998. No reason was found for the apparent change in the congressman's point of view with respect to the two objects of the impeachment at issue. These fundamental attributes of due process have been honored as required parts of modern impeachment protocol since at least 1870. It's not seriously debatable, nor should it be by any American legislator. In spite of all this, the House leadership defied all the norms and denied the then president all of his basic and constitutionally protected rights. For then President Donald Trump, the House impeachment procedure lacked any semblance of due process whatever. It simply cannot be credibly argued to the country, and we do not make special rules for different targets. It's the very integrity of the institution that suffers when we do, and that is what the House leadership knowingly has caused. A review of the House record reveals that the Speaker streamlined the impeachment process. House Resolution 24 to go straight to the floor for a 2-hour debate and a vote without the ability for amendments. The House record reflects no committee hearing, No witnesses, no presentation or cross-examination of evidence, and no opportunity for the accused to respond or even have counsel present to object. As the New York Times recently reported, there were no witness interviews, no hearings,
Yeah,
no
Jim G, I
debates,
agree.
and no real additional
Different
fact
targets.
finding.
Interesting choice of words.
House managers claimed the need for impeachment was so urgent that they had to rush the proceedings with no time to spare for a more thorough investigation, or really any investigation at all.
There's some legitimate people in this
claim is belied
chat right now,
by what
and
happened
there are some
or
perps.
didn't happen next.
I'm going to let everybody talk.
The House leadership unilaterally and by choice waited another 12 days to deliver the article to this Senate to begin the trial process. In other words, the House leadership spent more time holding the adopted article than it did on the whole process leading up to the adoption of the article. That intentional delay, designed to avoid having the trial begin while Mr. Trump was still president, led to yet another egregious denial of due process.
I'm going to do it every time he does.
Article 1, Section 3.
That's got to mean something.
Clause 6 of our Constitution, of course, provides in pertinent part that the Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. When sitting for that purpose, they shall be on oath or affirmation, and when the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside. By intentionally waiting until President Trump's term of office expired before delivering the article of impeachment to the Senate to initiate trial proceedings, Speaker Pelosi deprived then-President Trump of the express constitutional right and the right under the Senate's own Rule 4 to have the Chief Justice of the United States preside over his trial and wield the considerable power provided for in the rules of procedure and practice in the Senate when sitting on impeachment trials. That power includes, under Rule 5, the presiding officer's exclusive right to make and issue all orders, under Rule 7, to make all evidentiary orders, subject to objections by a member of the Senate. We say respectfully that this intentional delay by Speaker Pelosi, such that in the intervening period, President Trump became private citizen, Mr. Trump, constitutes a lapse or waiver of jurisdiction here. For Mr. Trump no longer is the president, described as subject to impeachment in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6, and in Article 2, Section 4. And this body, therefore, has no jurisdiction as a function of that additional due process violation by Speaker Pelosi. Moreover, with all due respect, then President Trump suffered a tangible detriment from Speaker Pelosi's actions, which violates not only his rights to due process of law, but also his express constitutional right to have the Chief Justice preside. That tangible detriment includes the loss of the right to a conflict-free, impartial presiding officer, with all due respect. The very purpose behind requiring the Chief Justice to preside over the president's impeachment trial, along with the other benefits of having the two branches combined, the Chief Justice from the judiciary and the Senate, for the impeachment trial of the president, reflected in Federalist 66. One of the reasons the Chief Justice was chosen for that task. Mr. Trump now faces a situation in which the presiding officer will serve as both judge, with all the powers that the rules endow him with, and juror with a vote. And beyond that, the presiding officer, although enjoying a lifelong honorable reputation, of course, has been Mr. Trump's vocal and adamant opponent through.
Okay, I'm liking these comments by Delania Weir. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, but she says he's signaling, and the times he does it, pay close attention to what he's saying. Could this guy be an undercover patriot? This movie is wild. So when I was at the fire academy, I had this Marine Corps instructor, and he wasn't allowed to tell us what was on the test. But when he was up there lecturing, reading through material, when something important was coming up that was going to be on the test, he'd kick the podium twice. Boom, boom. And he didn't even tell us, hey, when I kick the podium twice, that's going to be on the test. He just started doing it. And eventually we started realizing when he kicks the podium, we should probably pay attention, maybe write down notes on that specific subject. First test comes around, boom, all of it was on the test. Scored a 99% on our first test. So that is a thing. That is a thing.
Throughout the Trump administration, and in fact, in the very matter on trial, The presiding officer respectfully already has publicly announced his fixed view before hearing any argument or evidence that Mr. Trump must be convicted on the article of impeachment before the Senate, and indeed that members in both parties have an obligation to vote to convict as well. Nowhere in this great country would any American, and certainly not this honorable presiding officer, consider this scenario to be consistent with any stretch of the American concept of due process and a fair trial, and certainly not even the appearance of either. By no stretch of the imagination could any fair-minded American be confident that a trial so conducted would or could be the fair trial promised by the leader. While most procedural aspects of a Senate impeachment trial may be non-justiciable political questions, this is not an excuse to ignore what law and precedent clearly require. The present situation either presents a violation of the constitutional text found in the articles mentioned above that require the Chief Justice to preside when the president is on trial, or it is a clear denial of due process and fair trial rights for private citizen Trump to face an impeachment trial so conducted by the Senate. The impeachment article should be treated as a nullity and dismissed based on the total lack of due process in the House. It should be dismissed because of Speaker Pelosi's intentional abandonment or waiver of jurisdiction, if the House ever acquired jurisdiction. And the article should be dismissed because the trial in the Senate of a private citizen is not permitted, let alone with the conflicts just described that attend this proceeding. Finally, on the subject of due process in this matter, I say the following.
Grab some water, buddy. Oh.
This is our nation's sacred constitution. It has served us well since it was written, and it's been amended only through a careful process. It is a document unique in all the world. It is a foundational part of what makes the United States a beacon of light among the other nations of the world. It not only has room for a tremendous variety of perspectives on the philosophical and political direction our country should take, it encourages the advocacy of our differences. But we have long held that fundamental to its health and well-being, and therefore to ours as a nation, is its insistence on due process for every citizen. The emphasis on the right to due process long ago was recognized as its life breath.
And
a primary guarantor
that isn't happening.
Its eternal viability as our political, civic, and national guiding light. We all well know that there are many systems in other countries around the world that do not offer any semblance of the safeguards our constitutional concept of due process provides. Some of them have chosen their own handbooks, which direct their citizens' conduct on penalty of death. This is one of them. There can be no room for due process in such a system as this, or the system would be lost. Snap decisions are required in a system like this to maintain power for one political philosophy over all others.
What book is that?
Those kinds of systems. But we as a nation have rejected those systems and the kind of snap decisions they demand to maintain control for one party, for one point of view, and for an imposed way of life. We choose to live freely under a constitution that guarantees our freedom.
I choose to, but I'm not allowed
fear
to
those
currently.
freedoms and seek to ensure adherence to a party line in all civic, political, spiritual, and other affairs, and to ensure that the party line is towed, and those systems have no place for due process. Snap decisions that remove political figures are the norm. Maintaining their systems depend on it. That is not our way in America, and never must be. We choose in America to live by our Constitution and its amendments, and the due process this document demands for every citizen among us. By putting your imprimatur on the snap judgment made in this matter to impeach the President of the United States without any semblance of due process at every step along the way, puts the office of the President of the United States at risk every single day. It is far too dangerous a proposition to countenance, and you must resoundingly reject it by sending the message now that this proceeding, lacking due process from start to finish, must end now with your vote that you lack jurisdiction to conduct an impeachment trial for a former president whose term in office has expired and who is now a private citizen.
Dude.
So one reason you must send this message here and now is because of the complete lack of due process that brought this article of impeachment before this body. God forbid we should ever lower our vigilance to the principle of due process. An impeachment trial of a private citizen Trump held before the Senate would be nothing more nor less than the trial of a private citizen by a legislative body. An impeachment trial by the Senate of a private citizen violates Article 1, Section 9 of the United States Constitution, which provides that no bill of attainder shall be passed. The bill of attainder, as this clause is known, prohibits Congress from enacting a law that legislatively determines guilt and inflicts punishment upon an identifiable individual without provision of the protections of a judicial trial.
Okay.
A bill of attainder is a legislative act which inflicts punishment without a judicial trial. A judicial trial.
Speaking my language here.
The distinguishing characteristic of a bill of attainder is the substitution of a legislative determination of guilt and legislative imposition of punishment for judicial finding and sentence.
Yes.
The Bill of Attainder clause in the separation of powers doctrine generally reflects the framers' concern that trial by a legislature lacks the safeguards necessary to prevent the abuse of power. As the Supreme Court explained in United States versus Brown, the best available evidence, the writings of the architects of our constitutional system, indicate that the Bill of Attainder clause was intended not as a narrow, technical, and therefore soon to be outmoded prohibition, but rather as an implementation of the separation of powers, a general safeguard against legislative exercise of the judicial function. More simply, trial by legislature. The Bill of Attainder reflected the framers' belief that the legislative branch is not so well suited as politically independent judges and juries. When the Senate undertakes an impeachment trial of a private citizen, as it clearly understands to be the case here, supported by the facts that the Chief Justice is not providing and Mr. Trump is not the president, it is acting as a judge and jury rather than a legislative body. And this is exactly the type of situation that the Bill of Attainder constitutional provision was meant to preclude. It is clear that disqualification from holding future office, the punishment the House managers intend to seek here, is a kind of punishment like a banishment and others that is subject to the constitutional prohibition against the passage of bills of attainder, under which general designation bills of pains and penalties are included. The cases include Cummings, Ex parte Garland, and this Brown case. The Supreme Court 3 times has struck down provisions that precluded support of the South or support of communism from holding certain jobs as being in violation of this prohibition.
You're talking about being blacklisted.
Thus, the impeachment of a private citizen in order to disqualify them from holding office is an unconstitutional act constituting a bill of attainder. Moreover, this is the exact type of situation in which the fear would be great that some members of the Senate might be susceptible to acting in the haste the House acted in when it rushed through the article of impeachment in less than 48 hours, acting hastily simply to appease the popular clamor of their political base, the very kind of concern expressed by Mr. Hamilton in Federalist 65. Moreover, as Chief Justice Marshall warned in Fletcher versus Peck, it is not to be disguised that the framers of the Constitution viewed with some apprehension the violent acts which might grow out of the feelings of the moment, and that the people of the United States, in adopting that instrument, have manifested a determination to shield themselves and their property from the effects of those sudden and strong passions to which men and women are exposed. The restrictions on the legislative power of the states are obviously founded in this sentiment. And the Constitution of the United States contains what may be deemed a Bill of Rights for the people of each state. No state shall pass any bill of attainder in this form. The power of the legislature over the lives and fortunes of individuals is expressly restrained. And so now let's turn to the text of the Constitution.
Okay. I think we're supposed to pay attention right here.
Turning to the text of the Constitution is for many, of course, the most appropriate and the most important starting place for trying to answer a Constitution-based question. There are several passages of the United States Constitution that relate to the federal impeachment process. Let's turn to a reading of the text now. A true textual analysis, as the name implies, always begins with the words of the text and only resorts to legislative history or history itself if the meaning of the text is not plain. As the Supreme Court has emphasized, statutory interpretation, as we always say, begins with the text. In interpreting the text, we are guided by the principle that the Constitution was written to be understood by the voters. Its words and phrases were used in their normal and ordinary, as distinguished from technical meaning. And we must enforce plain and unambiguous statutory language according to its terms. If the president is impeached, the unambiguous text of the Constitution commands that the Chief Justice of the United States shall preside, as we discussed earlier. Again, the Chief Justice is disinterested and nonpartisan. His presence brings dignity and solemnity to such a proceeding. In this case, the Chief Justice clearly is not presiding, and the conflict of interest wouldn't necessarily just arise as a substitute for the Vice President. It's the appearance of a conflict of interest and a conflict of interest and the prejudgment that we've discussed. In this case, as we say, the Chief Justice clearly is not presiding. The Senate President pro temp is presiding. It appears that in the leader's view, undoubtedly joined by other senators, this is permitted by the Constitution because the subject of the trial is a non-president. As such, it is conceded, as it must be, that for constitutional purposes of the trial, the accused is a non-president. The role of the Senate, though, is to decide whether or not to convict and thereby trigger the application of Article 2, Section 4, the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for, conviction of, treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. From which office shall a non-president be removed if convicted? A non-president doesn't hold an office, therefore cannot be impeached under this clause, which provides for the removal from office of the person under the impeachment attack.
Okay, so
the
there we
House
go.
managers contend
It says right there, somebody
that the
that's not
fact
the
that the Chief
president
Justice
can't
is
be
not
impeached.
providing does not impact the constitutional validity of this trial. Notably, they devote only a single paragraph of their trial memorandum to development so significant that it prompted multiple senators to declare the entire proceeding suspect, with one going so far as to say that it crystallized the unconstitutional nature of this proceeding. And the single paragraph that the House managers do devote to the issue is entirely unpersuasive on the merits. The House manager's position ignores traditional statutory canons of interpretation. It is well established that a term, as a matter of statutory interpretation, that a term appearing in several places in a statutory text is generally read the same way each time it appears. This presumption is at its most vigorous when a term is repeated within a given sentence. Additionally, the court in at least one instance has referred to a broader, quote, established canon, that similar language contained within the section of a statute be accorded a consistent meaning. I know this is a lot to listen to at once, a lot of words, but words are what make our Constitution, frankly, and the interpretation of that Constitution, as you well know, a product of words. If the text, quote, the President of the United States, and the constitutional provision requiring the Chief Justice to preside can refer only to the sitting president and not to former presidents, then the textual identification of the president contained in Article 2, Section 4, which makes the president amenable to impeachment in the first place, also excludes anyone other than the sitting president. In full, that sentence provides that, quote, the president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors.
Well, there's lots of
This is the
treason going on right
substantive
now.
phrase of the Constitution, vesting the conviction and removal power in the Senate, and it contains a clear jurisdictional limitation. The House managers do understand what the word president means for purposes of other constitutional provisions, and so they should understand this limitation as well. Only a sitting president is referred to as the President of the United States in the Constitution. And only a sitting president may be impeached, convicted, and removed upon it.
Delaney Weir, again, with the great comment. Well, she says, well, that's Justice Roberts. I'm not sure how neutral he is, having traveled on Lolita Express and questions surrounding his daughter's adoption. Maybe that's why he's not participating. Who knows? Justice Roberts also has huge amounts of money in Blackwater, the hedge fund, I believe they are, the investment firm, him and George Soros, big time investors in Blackwater. BlackRock, excuse me, not Blackwater, BlackRock.
Trial in the Senate. The president in Article 2, Section 4, and the president in Article 1, Section 3 identify the same person. If the accused is not the president in one, he is not the president in the other. No sound textual interpretation, I emphasize textual, no sound textual interpretation principle permits a contrary reading. In the words of the Supreme Court, it is a normal rule of statutory construction that identical words used in different parts of the same act are intended to have the same meaning. Unwittingly or unwillingly, as it may be, Senate Democrats, in their announcement that Senator Leahy is presiding, have already taken their position on this matter. The accused is not the president. The text of the United States Constitution, therefore, does not vest the Senate with the power to try him and remove him, a factual nullity, he can't be removed, something, or disqualify him, a legal nullity, as if he were the president. House managers contend the Senate has jurisdiction over this impeachment because despite the fact that he's no longer the president, the conduct that the former president is charged occurred while he was still in office. That argument does not in any way alter the Constitution's clear textual identification of the president. House managers justify their strained argument by noting that the Constitution's impeachment provisions are properly understood by reference to this overarching constitutional plan. But with that very justification in mind, their argument fails once again. In an impeachment, it is the accused's office that permits the impeachment. Ceasing to hold that office terminates the possibility and the purpose of impeachment. Private persons may not be impeached in America. And so they asked you to look back at the British model. The Constitution, as I say, does not make private citizens subject to impeachment. The founders rejected the British model that allowed Parliament to impeach anyone except for the king. And so they limited impeachment to certain public officials, including presidents in our country. Next, on the textual front, the primary, in fact, the only required remedy of conviction is removal. Article 2, Section 4, straightforward rule. Whenever a civil officer is impeached and convicted for high crimes and misdemeanors, they shall be removed. It is undeniable that in this instance, removal is moot in every possible regard. Removal is a factual and legal impossibility. Yet the article of impeachment itself, read it in the wherefore clause, it calls for removal. This is one reason why impeachment proceedings are different from ordinary trials and why the Constitution pointedly separates the two. In ordinary criminal jurisprudence, a person convicted of public crimes while he or she was in office may still be punished even though they no longer hold that office. Not so with impeachment. In a Senate impeachment trial, conviction means and requires removal. And conviction without a removal is no conviction at all. Only upon a valid conviction and its requisite enforceable removal may the additional judgment of disqualification plausibly be entertained. Presidents are impeachable because presidents are removable. Former presidents are not because they cannot be removed. The Constitution is clear. Trial by the Senate sitting as a court of impeachment is reserved for the President of the United States, not a private citizen who used to be President of the United States. Just as clear, the judgment required upon conviction is removal from office, and a former president can no longer be removed from office. The purpose, text, and structure of the Constitution impeachment clauses confirm this intuitive and common sense understanding. So wrote Judge Michael Ludwig, former judge in the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. And indeed, there are state court decisions that analyze this very same language and conclude that impeachment can only be entertained against an existing officer subject to removal. Read State versus Hill, from Nebraska, and Smith versus Brantley, 1981 decision from the Florida Supreme Court. This is the first time that the United States Senate has ever been asked to apply the Constitution's textual identification of the president and the impeachment provisions to anyone other than the sitting president of the United States. And of course, most significantly from a textual approach, the term specifically used is the president, not a president. And there can be only one president, the incumbent at a time. Judge Ludwig relies on this textual reading for his firm conclusion that a former president cannot be impeached or convicted. Consider the alternative, as Robert Delahunty, Professor John, you have. If Mr. Trump can be convicted as the president, the language the Constitution uses, then why is he not still the president under the commander-in-chief clause, for example? They are joined by Professor Alan Dershowitz and University of Chicago Professor Richard Epstein in their focus and conclusion. They point out the dangers of an approach that deviates from a focus on
Dershowitz and Epstein,
if there is no temporal limitation. That's what they've suggested to you. Remember, you can go back in time and impeach any civil officer who ever served for anything that occurred during the course of their service, time immemorial. With the House manager's position, the concept necessarily includes all former executive officers and judges, including perhaps the impeachment now of Jimmy Carter for his handling of the Iran hostage scandal, as one example. That flows logically from their argument, without any hesitation. Further, they ask, why not then countenance a broad reading of other terms? When I say they ask, I mean these experts who've opined on this. Why not then countenance a broad reading of other terms, such as the terms like high crimes and misdemeanors, however broadly construed, are intended to be exclusively the only kind of conduct intended as impeachable. They conclude, these experts, that by writing that a non-textual impeachment power would undermine the Constitution's effort to make the president independent of Congress, a central goal of the founding fathers. The authors convincingly argue for textual analysis over non-textual analysis, over non-textual reliance on a presentation of history, suggesting that if one's presentation of history were to control, it would expressly permit conduct contrary to the express language, leading to clearly unintended results. I must tell you that I've spoken to Judge Ken Starr at some length over this past week about this. And this textual approach is something he too feels very strongly about. I also happen to be friendly with Chuck Cooper, by the way, is a fine person. Also happens to be a person who has a strong animus against President Trump. But Chuck Cooper is a fine lawyer and a fine person.
Who is Chuck Cooper?
As I'm sure our friends from Alabama know. As we already have discussed, the risks to the institution of the presidency and to any and all past officers is limited only by one's imagination. The weakness of the House manager's case is further demonstrated by their reliance on the unproven assertion that if President Trump is not impeached, future officers who are impeached will evade removal by resigning, either before impeachment or Senate trial. For example, they contend, citing various law professors, that, quote, any official who betrayed the public trust and was impeached could avoid accountability simply by resigning 1 minute before the Senate's final conviction vote. This argument is a complete canard. The Constitution expressly provides in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7, that a convicted party following impeachment shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law after removal. Clearly, a former civil officer who's not impeached is subject to the same. We have a judicial process in this country. We have an investigative process in this country to which no former office holder is immune. That's the process that should be running its course. That's the process the Bill of Attainder tells us is the appropriate one for investigation, prosecution, and punishment, with all of the attributes that branch. We're missing it by 2 articles here. Then the Article 3 courts provide. They provide that kind of appropriate adjudication. That's accountability. There are appropriate mechanisms in place for full and meaningful accountability, not through the legislature, which does not and cannot offer the safeguards of the judicial system which every private citizen is constitutionally entitled. But more to the point here, Their argument does nothing to empower a different reading of the Constitution's plain text. That is, one that reads the president in one provision to include former presidents, but reads the president in the other provision to mean only the sitting president. Second, this red herring of an argument also fails because the former president did not resign, even amid calls for his opponents that he do so. As the Senate need not either possesses the power or jurisdiction to try and convict a former president who resigned, or how it might best proceed to effectuate justice in such a case. That's the case. The plain meaning of the Constitution's text, faithfully and consistently applied, should govern whether the United States Senate is vested by the Constitution with the power to convict a private citizen of the United States. It is not. The House managers posit in their trial memorandum that despite the fact the primary and only necessary remedy upon conviction, removal, is a legal nullity, this late impeachment trial is appropriate because the other, secondary, optional remedy that the Senate is not even required to consider and which only takes effect upon a later separate vote, disqualification from future office, can still theoretically be applied to a former president. The managers contend Article 2, Section 4 states a straightforward rule. Whenever a civil officer is impeached and convicted for high crimes and misdemeanors, they shall be removed. Absolutely nothing about this rule implies, let alone requires, that former officials who can still face disqualification are immune from impeachment and conviction. That's what they say. I told you that today. In other words, so the argument goes, a president no longer holding office does not moot the entirety of remedies afforded by impeachment. This, however, also flies in the face of both the plain meaning of the text and the canons of statutory interpretation. First of all, the managers once again simply choose to ignore the text. Even in the passage that the managers cite, the word shall does, to put it mildly, imply a requirement. An imperative such that an impeachment in which removal would be impossible is invalid. Shall means shall. The Supreme Court has made clear that when a statute uses the word shall, Congress has imposed a mandatory duty upon the subject of the command, as in shall remove. Indeed, the mandatory shall normally creates an obligation impervious to judicial discretion. And wherever the Constitution commands,
don't mind me, I'm having lunch.
Terminates. Shall means mandatory, and shall be removed is not possible for a former officer no longer in office. Impeachment cannot apply. Now here's the and argument you may have heard about, read about, if you follow such things. This is another one Judge Starr is big on, and many of the textual scholars have written about. Managers critically ignore this language in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7, which states that judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification, from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. Ordinarily, as in everyday English, use of the conjunctive and in a list means that all of the listed requirements must be satisfied, while use of the disjunctive or means that only one of the listed requirements needs to be satisfied. Judge Kenneth Starr subscribes strongly to this argument and understands the comma to provide further support for the reading. Judge Michael Ludwig, again, recently argued, the Constitution links the impeachment remedy of disqualification from future office with the remedy of removal from the office that person currently occupies. The former remedy does not apply in situations where the latter is unavailable. Conviction and removal are inextricably intertwined. If removal no longer is possible, neither is an impeachment conviction. Judge Ludwig's view is consistent with that of Justice Joseph Story, in his famous commentaries on the Constitution, wherein Justice Story analyzed impeachment is inapplicable to officials who have left their position because removal, a primary remedy that the impeachment process authorizes, is no longer necessary. Justice Story noted that he is not coming to a firm posit on this. This is his belief. This is his thought process. There's also much force in the remark that an impeachment is a proceeding purely of a political nature. It is not so much designed to punish an offender as to secure the state against gross official misdemeanors. It touches neither his person nor his property, but simply divests him of his political capacity. Professor Philip Bobbitt. Now, I have to say, this is insulting. We heard earlier today, we don't cite any scholars. Professor Philip Bobbitt is the distinguished Wexler professor at Columbia University, who, along with Professor Charles Black, wrote the handbook on impeachment used for many, many years. He is a constitutional expert on impeachment. He has written that there is little discussion in the historical record surrounding the precise question of whether a person no longer a civil officer can be impeached. And in light of the clarity of the text, this is hardly surprising, Professor Bobbitt wrote. Professor Bobbitt, by the way, who has a rich family history in the Democratic Party, LBJ, also asserted the following as recently as January 27, 2021, arguing against holding this trial. He said, quote, "There is no authority granted to Congress to impeach and convict persons who are not civil officers of the United States. It's as simple as that. But simplicity doesn't mean unimportance," Professor Bobbitt wrote. "Limiting Congress to its specified powers is a crucial element in the central idea of the United States Constitution, putting the state under law." Professor Bobbitt and former Stanford University law professor Richard Danzig have remarked that impeachment's principal purpose, as the 66th of the Federalist Papers makes clear, is to check the encroachments of the executive. Trial by jury, rules of evidence, and other safeguards are put aside, they write, because of the need to protect the public from further abuse of office. Similarly, yesterday, Professor Eugene Konorovich wrote, "The Constitution provides that the impeachment process is to be used to remove all civil officers of the United States. That is, people holding a government position. Yet in the case of Mr. Trump, the House is reading the Constitution as if it said the process applies to all civil officers of the United States and people who aren't civil officers but once were. Exactly what it does not say." We've been told by the House managers about miscitations in our brief. I'd like to draw your attention to page 37. This is a substantive misrepresentation, to you, I would respectfully suggest. And it reflects to me a very different view of democracy, a fear of democracy. They wrote on page 37 of their brief that the framers, I'm paraphrasing the first part, the framers themselves would not have hesitated to convict on these facts. Their worldview, this is a quote now, was shaped by a study of classical history as well as a lived experience of resistance and resolution. They were aware of the danger posed by opportunists who incited mobs to violence for political gain. They drafted the Constitution to avoid such thuggery, which they associated with the threat of civil disorder and early assumption of power by a dictator. The citation is 178, Bernard Bailyn, The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution. That's this book. Professor Bailyn, when he gave this description of the threat of civil disorder and the early assumption of power by a dictator and thuggery, was referring to early colonists' view toward democracy. They feared democracy. That's what they call thuggery. Democracy, because it's an elitist point of view, an elitist political point of view. We don't fear democracy, we embrace it. In summing up, let's be crystal clear on where we stand and why we are here. The singular goal of the House managers and House leadership in pursuing the impeachment conviction of Donald J. Trump is to use these proceedings to disenfranchise at least 74 million Americans with whom they viscerally disagree, and to ensure that neither they nor any other American ever again can cast a vote for Donald Trump. And if they convince you to go forward, their ultimate
taking away your power,
is that this will be a shot across the back
blacklisting you
of any other candidate for public
removing
office
you from
who
society,
would dare to take up a
removing your
political
voice.
message that is very different from their own political point of view as the direction in which they wish to take our country. Under our Constitution, this body in the impeachment process must never be permitted to be weaponized for partisan political purposes. This article of impeachment must be dismissed for lack of jurisdiction based on what we have discussed here today and what's in our brief. The institution of the presidency is at risk unless a strong message is sent by the dismissal of the article of impeachment. Before we close, I want to leave you with two thoughts. One was expressed by Abraham Lincoln. He comes to mind first because of the way in which our nation is now divided. We must learn from his times. He had a simple but important message about the paramount importance of doing what is right. Mr. Lincoln said, stand with anybody that stands right, stand with him when he is right, and part with him when he goes wrong. In both cases, you are right. In both cases, you oppose the dangerous extremes. In both cases, you stand on moral ground and hold the ship level and steady. In both, you are national and nothing less than national. And the second message is from one of Mr. Lincoln's favorite poets, who wrote in 1849 at a time fraught with division and risk for even more. The message from that other time of division is a call for hope and unity to bring strength. It has special meaning today. Poet Longfellow wrote,
Longfellow.
Sail forth into the sea, O ship, through wind and wave, right onward steer. The moistened eye, the trembling lip are not the signs of doubt or fear. Sail forth into the sea of life, O gentle, loving, trusting wife, and safe from all adversity upon the bosom of that sea, thy comings and thy goings be. For gentleness and love and trust prevail o'er angry wave and gust, and in the wreck of noble lives, something immortal still survives. Thou too sail on, O ship of state, sail on, O Union, strong and great. Humanity with all its fears, with all the hopes of future years, is hanging breathless on thy fate. We know what master laid thy keel, what workman wrought thy ribs of steel, who make each mast and sail and rope, what anvils rang, what hammers beat, and what a forge and what a heat were shaped the angers of thy hope. Fear not each sudden sound and shock. 'Tis of the wave, excuse me, 'tis of the wave and not the rock. 'Tis but the flapping of the sail and not a rent made by the gale. In spite of rock and tempest's roar, in spite of false lights on the shore, sail on, not fear to breast the sea. Our hearts, our hopes are all with thee. Our hearts, our hopes, our prayers, our tears, our faith triumphant over our fears, are all with thee, are all with thee.
Yeah, he was getting a little bit emotional there. It seems. Oh, and then after he talks about all that freedom, due process,
stations leave us for
Constitution,
local
then he
coverage,
puts a
we'll
mask
continue
on.
Our coverage of former President Trump's impeachment trial here on NBC News. We just want to bring you up to date. David Schoen, one of the lawyers for the president, delivering a largely constitutional argument on the president's belief that the law does not afford this process for an ex-president. Here's Jamie Raskin, one of the House impeachment
to the managers and to the lawyers here. This has been the most bipartisan impeachment.
Telling me my TikTok is
it will continue to be so in the days ahead.
Spelled wrong. That's how it is on TikTok.
The desire to recess. So the only issue before the Senate today, of course, is whether Donald Trump is subject to the court of impeachment that the Senate has convened. We see no need to make any further argument that this body has the power to convict and to disqualify President Trump for his breathtaking constitutional crime of inciting a violent insurrection against our government. Tomorrow, we will address the amazing array of issues suggested by the thoughtful presentations by our colleagues, including the First Amendment, due process, partisanship under our Constitution, the Bill of Attainder Clause, and many, many more. But in the meantime, we waive all further arguments. We waive our 33 minutes of rebuttal, and we give those 33 minutes gratefully back to the Senate of the United States.
All time yielded back, all time has been yielded back. Then the question is whether Donald John Trump is subject to the jurisdiction of a court of impeachment for acts committed while President of the United States, notwithstanding the expiration of his term in that office. Nays, Mr. President. Is there a sufficient second? There is a sufficient second, and the clerk shall call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin. Ms. Baldwin, aye. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Barrasso, no. Mr. Bennett.
So is this the vote on
Mr. Bennett, aye.
impeaching
Mrs.
or not?
Blackburn. Mr.
All right, so this is the vote on what the key issue today was. The arguments were all on the question of whether it's constitutional or not to try an ex-president, keeping in mind he had been convicted and the offense for which he's charged had occurred.
Okay, well, shut up and let us hear the votes.
Impeached, and the offense occurred while he was still president. We'll be watching very closely the margin here to give us some hint where some Republicans may be leaning toward the ultimate vote of impeachment. Let me bring in Casey Hunt as we watch this vote. Casey, walk us through the numbers we should be looking for here.
Sure, Lester. So this is very straightforward in terms of the yays and nays. Yes, we do have the right to try Donald Trump in this court of impeachment. No, you're seeing many Republicans say no. Although
this is a vote. Okay, so this is a vote on whether they have the right.
Yes, that's an interesting
to try him
one to me, because Lester, we're watching to see if there's more than 5 Republicans who answer this question in the affirmative. And the 5 that we knew going into this were potentially willing to say yes to this trial and potentially to convict former President Trump. Senators Murkowski of Alaska, Collins of Maine, Ben Sasse from Nebraska, Mitt Romney of Utah, Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania. They are all people who have condemned the president's actions in the wake of the January 6th insurrection that we have been talking about all day. But we were looking to see if more Republicans might be willing to say, okay, yes, in fact, I will consider this. And of course, the number that would be needed to convict former President Trump is 17.
Feinstein, of course, she's going to say yes.
With all Democrats.
Imagine that.
2/3 of majority of the Senate to actually convict and prevent former President Trump from holding office again. We think that that's incredibly a steep hill to climb, and it's very, very difficult to count 217. But it is possible we could see some names pop up here, and Senator Cassidy is one of them that just caught my eye, that we may be looking at asking more questions about going forward to see if they may be more open to the arguments that the managers may be willing to present. There were a couple senators, Mitch McConnell and Rob Portman among them, who had said previously that first procedural vote that they took kind of in
imagine this.
Told us a little bit about where they might land, didn't represent where they were.
That's a definite yay on her.
Acquittal. So still some open questions there, Lester. But also just to touch on what we just saw unfold here on the floor ahead of this vote, I think there was a lot of confusion about the arguments that the Trump team made, especially in the first half of their argument.
All right, so if every Democrat votes yay and every Republican votes nay,
wondering what exactly was
Kelly,
going on, and I know
that guy.
Our colleagues have some reporting about how the Trump team was defending that. But from the perspective of sources up here,
then how does this turn out?
Who were listening, it did feel as though it was wandering and not necessarily focused on the question at hand. Now, of course, that may not actually sway any minds here. We, of course, are seeing the rules that have governed our politics for the last 4 years under Trump playing out in a pretty definitive and predictable way here. But I do also think it's important to underscore that even if it's just a few more Republicans, remember that this impeachment was actually the most bipartisan in history, with those 10 House members, 10 Republican House members voting to impeach the president. And this could be the most bipartisan vote in terms of the question of whether to convict or acquit that we have seen. Of course, in some past cases, we have not gotten as far as such a vote in the past.
Well, how did Cynthia Loomis vote?
A critical vote here, just to give us kind of a read of the temperature of the room and what we may see later on when we see that final vote. And of course, this sets the stage for the main arguments, which are set to unfold tomorrow, as you heard the lead impeachment manager, Jamie Raskin, outline there, Lester.
And I think we just believe Mitch McConnell, minority leader, has voted no. He'd been a big question mark because of some of the statements that he had made prior to this. We're going to let you keep following this vote, Casey. Let me quickly bring in NBC News political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd. Chuck, day one of this trial, again, this was on the constitutionality question, but in general, what are your thoughts about the different ways these two sides are approaching the larger question?
Well, to be blunt here, the House impeachment managers they believe they have a pretty easy case to make, a pretty simple case to make. And frankly, the Trump team, you can tell that they're struggling to come up with a defense here. In general, they've tried a whole bunch of ideas. In fact, I think I saw what they did. It felt like a spaghetti at the wall event at times. the former president's lawyer would argue that the impeachment was rushed, or that they wanted more time, that it was taking too long, or that you should have done it quickly. But I think that was actually a feature, not a bug. What it felt like to me was a series of potential ways, loose legal arguments you can throw out there to a Republican senator who then can go on primetime cable and somehow rationalize this decision without talking about the events of January 6th. That seemed to be the strategy. I think
NBC News, one of the worst out there. That's why I chose this one.
This would have been a rout today. And Team Raskin would have, I think, won their argument. I don't think anybody would have thought.
We're going to comment and do commentary on something, make it one of the worst ones. These guys, CNN.
This is a political
Even Fox News.
And we're
Fox News is probably saying the same things.
I am stunned that it has only acquired, it looks like, one more Republican than the last time they held this vote. Because to me, if you just judge this by the merits, the Trump team, that was a meandering disaster for early on. And then at times Mr. Schoen was just throwing out legal phrases to just almost hoping that something stuck for some senator. And it may be that when you see McConnell I looked at some of the people I was keeping an eye on: McConnell, Cornyn, Capito, Burr. These were people I thought could be on the fence here. If they're not voting yes on this constitutionality question, I think we know where they're going to vote when the acquittal or conviction is up in the air.
Yeah, let's go back inside the chamber right now. They should be nearing the end of the vote. Let's see where they are. Looks like they're doing the final tally right now.
So this is the vote on whether the impeachment trial can move forward, if it's constitutional or not.
Here, and again, as we've talked about, it may only be at the end of the day only one.
If I'm hearing this right,
flip, if you will. And
on this vote, the yeas are 56, the nays are 44, and pursuant to S. 47. The Senate, having voted in the affirmative on the foregoing question,
56 to 44,
the Senate shall proceed with the trial as provided under the provisions of that resolution.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent that the trial adjourn until 12 noon tomorrow, Wednesday, February 10th, and that this order also constitute the adjournment of the Senate.
Without objection, we shall stand in adjournment until noon tomorrow.
all right, that adjourns day one of the impeachment trial of President Trump. You just saw that 56-44 vote, essentially the vote rejecting the argument of Trump lawyers that this process is unconstitutional. Therefore, as you know, it was noted by Mr. Schumer, that Senator Schumer, that they'll pick up tomorrow at noon. And that is when we get into the heart of this trial and the larger question of whether former President Trump incited.
Okay, so they just voted that it's constitutional that a private citizen can be impeached, 56-44, and these are the same people that are going to be voting on the impeachment. So that kind of tells you already what they're going to try to do tomorrow, what they're going to do tomorrow. So there's a few scenarios. They'll actually make it through this, or they're being tested right now to see if they're going to use their political power to commit treason, to be complicit in illegal operations, tactics. And then they've proven who they are. And if the military is in control and they're going to follow through with what some of us think they're working on right now, the largest sting operation in the history of the United States, then they're screwed, which would be awesome. Again, this could all be theater. This could all be theater.
Get those crowds from the rally to go to the Capitol and attack the Capitol. Let's bring in Chief Washington correspondent Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, well, let's first talk about that breakdown, 56-44. What does that say about the ultimate vote?
Well, I don't know that we should draw too much about the ultimate vote because they haven't heard all the evidence yet. These were the opening arguments, and it was procedural.
Yeah.
It was on the constitutional issues, I should say. It was legalistic. But it does indicate that so far the Republicans are holding, and that they will not, if this does hold throughout the duration of the trial, they won't have the 67 votes that they need to convict. Now, as was just pointed out, Senator Cassidy, as Casey quickly pointed out, did join. Bill Cassidy, he was on Meet the Press with Chuck, as you know, just a few days ago on Sunday, and he said he had an open mind. And a number of these senators have said they have an open mind. They want to hear the evidence. So it remains to be seen whether or not they are persuaded during the rest of the days of this trial. Presumably, the House managers have more evidence. They say they have some new evidence. Let's see what kind of case they present. But they certainly did release that tape, which was very powerful, and there was the emotional statement in closing by Jamie Raskin. So they did have a lot of force in their arguments. I think it's pretty well, at least the reactions that we're getting from people we're talking to, pretty well determined that the counter argument was weaker than one might have hoped for if you're Donald Trump, because they didn't have as good an argument, according to most constitutional experts, the legal experts whom we've talked to, even some conservative Republican jurists.
Oh, that's why they voted,
very
because they
well-known
didn't have.
jurists are saying that there is the
This is
constitutional
ridiculous.
right
Why
to
am
a
I even
trial,
doing this?
as long as the impeachment did take
I guess it gives
place
us
and the
a way
alleged
to
offenses
talk with each
while
other,
Donald Trump was still
share
president.
ideas.
All right, Andrew, let me turn now to NBC News political analyst and former Democratic Missouri Senator Claire McCaskill and NBC News legal analyst Neil Katyal, who was acting Solicitor General under President Obama. Claire, let me start
Oh,
with
let's
you.
talk to that guy.
We saw in the House manager's argument that powerful,
You won't be
graphic
biased.
13-minute
She,
tape clearly setting up
whatever.
how they're going to proceed
They,
in the days ahead. What do you think the power of those images, if they can string the words and the timeline together, how powerful will that be in terms of perhaps changing some minds?
I don't know how many minds will change in the Senate chamber, but any American who watches that, I think, is going to have to do a gut check. It is why the majority of America supports the conviction of Donald Trump after his impeachment. I thought the first arguments made by the House managers, and I'm
have they mentioned once what he's being convicted
were
of?
brilliant. They were to the point. They were legally constructed in a very sound way. And then compare and contrast the president's lawyers. The first presentation was frankly incoherent. And then the second presentation seemed angry and failed to even distinguish the clear precedents that have been laid out in history that support the jurisdiction of the Senate to try the former president under these facts and circumstances. And they failed completely to argue, in fact, impeached while he was still in office.
Yeah, Neil, let me turn to you about the case ahead. This is not a criminal trial, but if it was one, how strong a line would you need to draw from the president? Not only the words we heard on the podium, but any other conversations you would have had with those who stormed the Capitol. How much would you need to close this case?
Stormed the Capitol.
You need something. And here it's remarkable that, look, I think Jamie Raskin gave maybe the best oral argument I've ever heard in any court setting ever, and hitting both head and heart. But one thing he didn't say was the Gabe Sterling December 1st statement, in which Sterling said, Mr. President, stop this rhetoric. Someone is going to get shot. Someone is going to get killed. He's clearly holding that back and setting the tone tomorrow and over the next days. Because look, there are some ambiguous statements that Donald Trump has made over time. But when you start with that and that warning, and then you look at Trump's statements afterwards, it's that, Lester, which I think draws the gives the impeachment article so much force. And if I'm Donald Trump today, I'd be pretty worried. I wouldn't take much comfort in this 44-person vote that he got today, because it's really easy for the senators to say, oh, it's this constitutional issue. American public doesn't really totally understand, but Trump's lawyers didn't really even respond to the main arguments the House managers made today. They had two arguments. One,
what were they?
Trump wasn't a former official. when he was impeached, he was the sitting president. So this whole constitutional debate is besides the point. And number two, if you accept what Trump is saying here, you're creating a January exception to the Constitution, allowing presidents to do whatever they want. No answer.
Have they said one
Trump's
time
lawyers can
what
get
they
away with
want
that
to
on a
impeach
constitutional
him
issue,
for?
But tomorrow and in the days
Am I
ahead,
missing
Lester,
something?
as you say, the question's going to be all factual. What did Trump do? What did he say? What was his demeanor and the like? And there, if Trump's lawyers act the way they did today, it's bad news for Donald Trump. This is not a defense on the merits.
All right. Well, Neil and Claire, thanks to both of you. As we heard, they will resume this trial tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern time, when again they dig into really the heart of this larger question about the incitement of the riot and the attack on the Capitol. Concludes our coverage for now. I'll have a complete wrap up coming up on NBC Nightly News. We'll be back, of course, tomorrow at noon Eastern time for continuing special coverage on the second impeachment trial of Donald J. Trump. For now, I'm Lester Holt in New York. Good day, everyone.
That was ridiculous. Truman Show actors. Okay, I think I'm done with this. We were here for 2 hours and 50 minutes. So, yeah, does anybody know what he's being impeached for? What's going on here? What have they mentioned one time? So Delaney Weir says, remember that the entire 10 square mile city of Ball, Washington, D.C., which is in the shape of an owl, Ball. Yeah, it's fenced off with razor wire. It's like a big prison. The owl is caged. When does a bird sing? When it's caged. Jinji says, so this is about insurrection then. Delaney Weir responds, exactly. These people are panicking. I agree. Said that several times during this live stream. Next, they'll impeach George Washington for owning slaves, Thomas Jefferson for growing hemp. Their BS is wearing thin. Yeah, they're really reaching. They're creating things out of thin air, which they've done for a long time. People have just believed and gone along with all the nonsense. And a lot of people are waking up, being red-pilled, coming out of the coma that we've been induced into, the hypnotism, however you want to think about it. A lot of people are waking up from that, and this isn't going to last much longer. Okay. That was interesting theater. I don't even know what else to say about all of that. All right, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your comments. The people that were in this chat playing good cop, bad cop, earning your gift cards. I see you. I see you. The people that were contributing with insightful comments and questions. I appreciate you. You know who you are. And yeah, thanks for being here. Everybody have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.